The folder was the color of a school bus, and my son slid it across my kitchen table with 2 fingers, the way a man deals a card he already knows is good. It was the 15th of November. There was snow in the forecast, but none on the ground yet, only that hard gray sky we get in the Northeast Kingdom when the year has decided it is finished with you. I had a pot of chicken and rice on the back burner because Dale had called at 10 in the morning to say they were coming by, and 39 years of being his mother had taught me that he never showed up hungry unless he wanted something, and he never showed up full unless he wanted something bigger. Sloane took the chair by the window without being asked. She kept her coat on. She always kept her coat on in my house, and in 12 years I had never once seen her hang it on the hook by the door where Roy's barn coat used to hang, and where mine hangs now. Dale tapped the folder twice with his knuckle. "Go ahead and open it, Mom." Inside was a contract. 14 pages printed on one side held with a black clip. Timber sale agreement. 63 acres, Prouty Hill Road town of Colvin Hollow County of Orleans, state of Vermont. Every acre of sugar maple that his father tapped every March of his life, and his grandfather before that, and me every March since 1994, alone in the dark with a headlamp and a plastic sled. On the signature line there was a yellow sticky note. 4 words in my son's handwriting, the same handwriting that used to spell his name backward on his kindergarten papers. "Sign here, Mom." Behind the contract there was a second sheet. It was not part of the contract. It had been printed separately, and it had been printed at his house because the paper was the bright white kind they sell in reams at the office store, and not the yellowish stuff I buy 8 sheets at a time at the pharmacy. It was a list typed itemized, with a line for each name and a figure in the right-hand column. For my son, $30,000. For my daughter-in-law, $8,000. For my grandson, $200. For my granddaughter, $200. Total $38,400. I read it twice. Then I read it a 3rd time because the 3rd time I was reading the order of the names, and not the numbers. And the order of the names told me more than the numbers did. Sloane laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. That is the part I want understood. It was a light, easy social laugh, the kind you use at a party when somebody's dog does something. "It is only trees, Arletta. You do not even lose anything." In 12 years she has never once called me anything but Arletta. Not Mom, not Mother, not Mrs. Prouty. Arletta, the way you would say the name of a woman who comes to clean on Thursdays. I put the papers down and squared the edges with the flat of my hand, which is a thing I do when I need my hands to have a job. Then I smiled at my son and I told him I would take care of it, and I promised him a special surprise on Christmas Eve. His whole body let go. I watched it happen. His shoulders dropped 1.5 inches, and he laughed and came around the table and kissed the top of my head, and he said, "I knew you would come through, Mom." And Sloane took out her phone. They stayed 19 more minutes. They did not eat the chicken and rice. There were 3 things in that folder that I noticed and did not mention, and I want to set them down here in the order I noticed them, because everything that came after grew out of those 3 things. The first was the date. The contract was dated the 24th of October. My son had put a sticky note on a document that was 3 weeks old and asked me to sign it as though the idea had occurred to him that morning. The second was the signature block on page 14. The buyer had already signed. Buddy LaChance logging in blue ballpoint with the loop on the L that half the men in this county make because they learned to write from the same 2 teachers. Somebody had signed for my trees before anybody had asked me about my trees. The third was on page 4 under the heading Description of Harvest. Diameter limit cut 14 inches and above measured at breast height. I sat with that one for a while after they left. A sugar maple is not ready to tap until it is about 10 inches through. It is not really worth tapping until it is 12. A tree at 14 inches carries 1 tap. At 18, it can carry 2. The trees that hold up a sugar bush, the ones that make the season, the ones you walk to first in March, because they run before anything else runs. Those are every single tree above 14 inches. Diameter limit cut 14 inches and above is not a harvest. It is a shave. It takes every producing tree on the hill and leaves you 63 acres of saplings and slash, and a building full of equipment with nothing to put in it. $152,000, the contract said, for the standing timber. They wanted $38,400 of it for Christmas. I want to explain what the sugar bush is, because if you do not understand that none of the rest of it will land the way it landed on me. The Prouties have held that hill since before the Civil War. The deed chain goes back further than the town clerk's oldest book, which starts in 1856 because there was a fire. It was never planted. Nobody plants a sugar bush. You inherit a piece of northern hardwood forest that the glaciers and the weather decided to make mostly maple, and then for 150 years your family thins out the beech and the poplar and the striped maple and leaves the sugar maple room to put on wood, and after 5 or 6 generations of that, you have something that a forester will stand in the middle of and go quiet. Roy's father and Roy built the sugar house in 1961. It is 32 feet by 18 board and batten with a cupola on the roof that opens with a rope and a cleat so the steam can get out. Roy was 9 years old that summer, and his job was to hand up nails. He told me that story at least 40 times, and every single time he told it as though he had never told it before, and every single time he made a point of saying that his father let him drive one nail on the ridge board and that he could still find it. I have found it. It is 9 inches from the north end, and it is bent over sideways because a 9-year-old drove it. We ran buckets until 1978, and then Roy and his father put in tubing 3/16 line into half-inch mainline gravity fed. No pumps, no vacuum, because the hill has the drop for it, and because Roy did not believe in owing money for something that gravity would do for free. That tubing has been patched and replaced in sections 100 times over. Some of the main line up on the north face is the original, and every spring I walk it with a roll of tape and a pocket knife, and I fix what the squirrels and the deer and the ice did over the winter. 2,400 taps when it is all running. 40 gallons of sap makes 1 gallon of syrup. People hear that, and they nod, and they do not really hear it. It means that to make 1 gallon of syrup, you boil off 39 gallons of water, and water does not want to leave. It takes about a cord of dry hardwood to make 25 gallons of syrup on a rig like mine, and it takes a person standing in front of the arch feeding it a split every 4 minutes for as long as the sap is coming, and when the sap is coming it does not stop at supper time, and it does not stop because you are 67 years old, and your hip is artificial. The last week of March I do not sleep in a bed. I sleep in the chair in the corner of the sugar house in 20-minute pieces with the draw-off valve where I can reach it, and the steam comes down off the cupola and freezes on the inside of the window in a pattern like fern, and the whole building smells like the inside of a caramel. I have done that alone since the spring of 1994. 32 seasons. Not one person in my son's family has ever asked me a single question about it. Not what a good year is. Not how much a gallon sells for. Not why my hands look the way they look in April. In 12 years, Sloan has been inside that building exactly once in a pair of white sneakers for about 90 seconds. And on the way out, she said it was cute how it looked like a little cabin, and Dale laughed, and I did not say anything because I was standing in front of a rolling boil, and I have learned that you do not take your eyes off a rolling boil to defend yourself. There is one tree I need to tell you about now, because it matters later. At the top of the second bench, where the old stone wall makes its turn to the east, there is a sugar maple that was already large when Roy's grandfather was a boy. It is 38 inches through at chest height, which for a maple in Vermont is enormous. It carries 3 taps, and it runs before anything else on the hill, sometimes a full week before, because it stands where the morning sun comes over the ridge and hits it first. In the spring of 1987, Roy drilled the first tap hole of the season into that tree, and then he took out his knife and cut a blaze into the bark down by his knee, a shallow rectangle about the size of a playing card, and inside it he carved a D and then 8-6. Dale had been born the previous October. Roy was 35. He came down off the hill that day with sap on his gloves, and he told me he had put the boy's name on the biggest tree we had, and he said it the way men say things when they mean something larger and do not have the words for it. A blaze like that heals over into a raised scar, and it stays legible for 30 or 40 years, and then the bark slowly swallows it. That one was still legible. I could still put my thumb in the crossbar of the D. Roy died on the 18th of December, 1993. He was 41 years old. He was the road crew foreman for the town of Colvin Hollow, and he had been out since 2 in the morning on the first real storm of the year, plowing the Hollow Road, and then the school route, and then the hill roads, and he came off shift a little after 11, and he stopped at the town garage to sign the log, and he went down between the truck and the fuel tank, and he was gone before anybody got to him. They told me it was his heart, and that it was fast. I have thought about that word fast for 32 years, and I have never decided whether it was a kindness or a theft. Dale was 7. He was in 2nd grade. I picked him up from school myself because I could not stand the idea of somebody else's mother telling him in a car, and we sat in the truck in the school lot with the engine running and the wipers going, and I told him, and he did not cry. He looked at the dashboard and he asked me one question. Are we poor now? I told him no, I told him we would never be poor because we had the hill and we had each other, and as long as we had those two things, we would be all right. I meant it. I want to be clear about that. I was 35 years old, and I meant every word of it, and for a long time afterward, I believed that I had said the right thing to my son in the worst hour of his life. I am not so sure anymore. I think a boy of 7 hears the words "we had the hill" and files them next to the words "we are all right." And I think if you never take that filing out and look at it again, it can sit in there for 32 years and turn into something else. The funeral was on the 22nd, 3 days before Christmas. The road crew came in their work jackets because none of them owned suits, and they stood at the back of the church in a line, and afterward every one of them shook my hand and said the same 6 or 7 words. Ruth Ann Pike made 200 sandwiches. The school kitchen where I worked sent over 4 sheet cakes and a case of coffee, and the principal wrote a card that I still have. That was the winter I learned to run the evaporator by myself. Roy died in December, and the sap ran in March, and there was no version of the world in which I let that season go by. I made 94 gallons that first year, and about a third of it was too dark to sell, and I did it anyway, and Dale sat in the corner in a snowsuit doing his spelling words, and that is the picture I keep. I told Ruth Ann Pike about the folder on the 17th of November, 2 days after. Ruth Ann has lived across the road from me since 1984. She drove the school bus in this town for 31 years, the number 4 route, which is the hill route, which is the one with the 2 hairpins that everybody else refused. She is 72 now. She has a bad shoulder from throwing the door lever 100,000 times, and she is the only person alive who was in my kitchen the day after Roy's funeral and is still in my kitchen. I did not go over there to tell her. I went over there to borrow a jar lifter. She poured coffee and put a plate of nothing in particular in front of me and waited, and after about 6 minutes I told her. Ruth Ann does not comfort. In 41 years I have never once heard her say it will be all right, or you poor thing, or he does not mean it. She sat there and she turned the sugar bowl a quarter turn on the table, which is what she does instead of talking, and then she asked me one question. He brought you a contract the logger had already signed. Yes. So what happens if you say no? I opened my mouth and I did not have anything to put in it. She turned the sugar bowl again. That is what I would want to know, she said. Not whether he thought you would say yes, whether he made a plan for you saying no. I drove home 400 feet and sat in my own driveway with the truck off. Because here is the thing about that question. If a man asks his mother for money and she says no, he goes home and he is angry and he tells his wife that his mother is impossible, and that is the end of it. That is a normal, ugly thing that happens in 1,000 families. But if a man walks into his mother's kitchen with a 14-page contract that the buyer has already executed and a landing already priced into the deal and a number he has already told other people about, then he is not asking. He is collecting. And a man who is collecting has thought about what he does if the collection fails. I could not get past it. I lay awake that night doing what I always do when I cannot sleep, which is walk the hill in my head tree by tree from the gate up the skid road to the first bench and across to the stone wall. I want to tell you about my work because it is the part of my life that nobody in that folder has ever thought about for 10 consecutive seconds. I cooked at Colvin Hollow Elementary School for 38 years. I started in the fall of 1983 when I was 25, and Dale had not been born yet, and I retired in June of 2021. Up at 4:30. In the building by 5:40. The ovens take 50 minutes to come up, and the steam kettle takes longer than that, and the milk truck comes at 6:15. And if you are not at the loading door, he leaves it on the ramp in the rain. We fed 190 children a day, give or take, plus the staff. I ran an 80-quart Kettle 2 convection ovens, a flat top, and a dish machine that broke every February for 38 years. I made everything from scratch until about 2008. And then the district went to a lot of frozen product, and I fought that quietly for the rest of my career by making my own sauce anyway and putting it on top. Here is what a school cook knows, and I do not think anyone has ever asked me about it, so I will say it here. I knew which children came to school without breakfast. I knew it by the second week of September every year for 38 years, and I knew it before the teachers did because a hungry child does not act hungry at 8 in the morning. He acts hungry at 10:40 when the smell starts coming down the hall, and I could see the door from where I stood. I kept a plate. It was never official, and it was never a program, and I never once wrote it down. I kept a plate warm in the pass-through, and I kept a box of the peanut butter crackers in the drawer under the cash drawer, and every year there were between 4 and 11 children in this town who ate something out of my kitchen that nobody ever billed anybody for. Some of them are grown now with children of their own on the same route. 2 of them work at the co-op, and they call me Mrs. P. One of them is a state trooper. One of them died of an overdose in Newport in 2019, and I went to that funeral, and I stood at the back with the road crew's sons. The scar on the back of my left hand is from 2004, and it is not from the school. It is from the sugar house. I was drawing off into a bucket on the floor because the barrel dolly had a flat, and I slipped on the boards and put my hand into the flow, and 219 degrees of syrup went across the back of it. The scar is 4 inches long and shaped a little like the state of Vermont, which Ruth Ann pointed out about a year later, and which I did not think was funny then and think is very funny now. Nobody remembers the name of the woman who cooked their school lunch. That is not a complaint. That is a description of the job. You are the last name in the newsletter under Also Thanks To, and you are the person who knows exactly how many pounds of ground beef the 5th grade eats. I retired in June of 2021. My back and my knees had gotten to where I could not do the pans anymore. They gave me a cake, which is a thing that has never stopped being funny to me, and a card signed by 91 children, and I still have the card in the drawer of the side table. Dale went to the State College in Linden and graduated in 2008. I took out a Parent Plus loan for $21,000 because that was the difference between what he had and what the year cost. I paid it back over 9 years on a school cook's salary, and I paid the last of it in 2017, and the month I paid it off, I did not tell anybody because who would I have told? He was a good boy. I need to say that plainly, because otherwise the rest of this sounds like I raised a monster and I did not. He was a good boy who was quiet after his father died, and who got quieter every year, and who used to come up to the sugar house in March all through high school, and stay until 2 in the morning without being asked, and who could tell you what the hydrometer read from across the room. He stopped coming up the year he turned 26. He met Sloane Hallowell in 2014 at an event at her father's marina on Lake Memphremagog. Gordon Hallowell sells boats. He sells boats, and he sells the slips to keep them in and the service contracts to maintain them, and he has been the 2nd or 3rd richest man in Newport for about 20 years. They were married in September of 2015 at the club on the lake. Gordon paid for most of it and made sure everybody knew he had paid for most of it, and I was asked for $4,000 toward the flowers and what Sloane's mother called the ambiance. I did not have $4,000. I sold Roy's truck. It was a 1986 Ford 3/4 ton with the plow frame still on it. He had bought it new the year Dale was born. It had 240,000 miles on it, and I had kept it inspected for 22 years after he died, and I used it to haul wood up the skid road every fall. I sold it to a man in Barton for $4,100, and I gave $4,000 of it to my son, and I put the 100 in the bank. Nobody at that wedding asked me where the money came from. Sloane's mother said the peonies were divine. I drive a 1998 Ford now. It was Ruth Ann's brother's. It is not as good a truck. Sloane made her opinion of my house clear within about 6 weeks of meeting me, and she did it the way people like her always do it, which is by admiring things. The kitchen is so authentic. I love that you have not changed anything. That wood stove is such a look. The one that stayed with me was the sugar house. She came up the hill in September of 2016, 6 months pregnant with Wyatt in white sneakers, and Dale walked her through it, and she stood in the doorway and did not come all the way in, and on the way back down, she said, "It is adorable. It is like a little cabin." It is not a cabin. It is a factory. It is a small, hot, dangerous factory that has produced a food product every spring for 65 years and has put a roof on that house and a coat on that boy and 9 years of loan payments into a bank in Montpelier. But I said thank you because she was pregnant, and because it was September, and because that is what I did for 12 years every time without exception. I said thank you. They came for supper on the 22nd of November, a Saturday 7 days after the folder. They brought the children, which they do about 6 times a year. Wyatt is 9. Piper is 6. Wyatt came through the door ahead of everybody the way he does, and got about 4 feet in and said, "Grammy, did you get us anything? Not hello? Not a hug? Did you get us anything?" I said I had made molasses cookies that morning, and there were 2 dozen on the rack. "Oh," he said, "just cookies." Sloane was standing right there taking off Piper's boots. She heard it. She did not say a word to him about it. She did not say be grateful, or say thank you to your grandmother, Or your grandmother got up at 6 to make those. She smiled at me with her mouth and went to hang up her own coat, and then did not hang up her own coat. I do not blame a 9-year-old boy. A 9-year-old boy says what the house he lives in has taught him to say. Wyatt has been taught that I am a place where you receive objects. He has not been taught that I am a person, because nobody in his house has ever behaved in front of him as though I were one. Supper was ham and scalloped potatoes and green beans I put up in August. Sloane brought up the contract 3 times. The first time was over the potatoes, and it was casual. Did you get a chance to look through that paperwork, Arletta? I said I had. She said it is very straightforward. The second time was about 10 minutes later, and it was about her father. Daddy says the market for hardwood is unusually strong right now. He says this is the year. The third time was over the pie, and it was not casual at all. We just need to know by Thanksgiving realistically because of scheduling. Because of scheduling. That was the sentence that told me the machines had a date. Dale spent most of the meal talking about opportunity. He works for a hardwood flooring distributor out of Burlington Regional Sales, and he is good at it. And when he talks about wood, he talks about it in board feet and grades, and he does not hear himself doing it. He told me twice that Select and Better Hard Maple was moving. He told me what 1,000 board feet was going for. He said the word stumpage at my dinner table to me about my hill. At one point he said, "Honestly, Mom, the hill is not doing anything. It is just sitting there." I put my fork down, and I picked it up again. Piper, who is 6, asked me why my hands were brown at the knuckles. I told her it was from working outside. She said, "Like a farmer." And I said, "Yes, like a farmer," and she seemed satisfied, and she is the only person who asked me a question about my life in that entire evening. They left at 7:20 because the children had to be in bed. Nobody cleared a plate. I want to be exact about this, because it is the smallest thing in this whole account, and it is the one that I still think about. 4 adults and 2 children ate a meal at my table. 9 plates, 4 glasses, a serving bowl, the roasting pan, the pie plate, 2 saucepans, the colander, the cutting board, and every fork and knife in the house that matches. I stood at that sink from 7:20 until 8:50. My hip was bad that night because of the weather. There is a spot about 40 minutes into standing where it starts to feel like somebody has put a stone in the joint, and after that, it does not get worse, it just stays. Somewhere around the roasting pan, I stopped and looked at my hands under the water. They are 67-year-old hands. The knuckles are enlarged. There is the scar on the left. The nails are short because they have to be. There is a callus on the right palm below the middle finger from the handle of the sap ladle, which is a callus I have carried continuously since 1994, and which is the only thing on my body that has not changed in 32 years. Those hands lifted 80-quart kettles for 38 years. Those hands drove that boy to Linden with everything he owned in the back of Roy's truck. Those hands have pulled the draw-off valve maybe 40,000 times. Nobody has ever bought those hands a bottle of lotion. That is not the tragedy. I know it is not the tragedy. But it went through me at 8:15 at night at my own sink, and it went through me hard, and I put both of them flat on the bottom of the sink under the hot water, and I stood there for a minute, and then I finished the pan. Renee Tatro called my house on Tuesday the 25th of November at 4:20 in the afternoon. Renee is the assistant town clerk. She is 69. She has worked in that office for 26 years, first 2 days a week, and now 4. And before that, she cut hair. Her mother and Roy's mother were cousins, which in this town means we are related, and it also means we are not related, depending on who is asking. She did not open with hello. "Arletta, it is Renee." "Renee." There was a pause on the line that went on a beat too long, and in a town of 940 people, you learn to read a pause like that, the way a sailor reads a sky. "I want to say something, and I want to say it right," she said. "The land records are public. Anybody can walk in and read them. Anybody at all. Me telling you to come read them is not me telling you anything I should not. All right? Come down tomorrow when we open. Ask me for book 214. Open it to page 87. Renee, what is on page 87? I would like you to see it yourself," she said, "because if I tell you over the phone, you are going to argue with me, and then you are going to have to see it anyway." I said I would be there at 9. I did not sleep. I got up at 2 and made tea and sat in the front room in the dark with the tea going cold in my hands, and I went through everything I could think of. A lien, a tax thing, something from the state, a mortgage I had forgotten, a boundary claim from the Bouchards on the East Line. Not once in 6 hours did I land on the actual answer. Not once. I want that on the record. I lay there and I thought of 11 wrong things, and none of the 11 was even in the same county as the truth. The town office opens at 9, and I was in the lot at 8:40. It is one room with a counter, a flag, a photocopier from before the flood, and a vault at the back where the land records are on shelves in numbered books, with green cloth spines and red leather corners, going back to 1856. Renee was already there with her coat on. She did not make small talk. She went into the vault and came out with book 214, which is a recent one, and she set it on the counter and opened it herself and turned it around to face me and put her finger at the top of page 87 and then took her finger away. Durable power of attorney. I, Arletta M. Prouty of Colvin Hollow, Vermont, do hereby appoint Dale R. Prouty as my agent. Recorded January 9th, 2023 at 3:51 in the afternoon. At the bottom of the second page, there was a signature. It was mine. It was mine. That is what I need you to understand. It was not a forgery. It was not close. It was my A with the flat top I have made since I was in the 8th grade, and my 2 T's crossed together in one stroke, and the little hook on the Y that I have never been able to get rid of. Below my signature, there was a notary block and a stamp. Darlene M. Frizzell, Notary, Public State of Vermont, and a commission number, and beside it the words witnessed and acknowledged. I put both hands on the counter, because I remembered her. Not the document. Her. On the 6th of January, 2023, I had my right hip replaced at the hospital in Newport, and on the 7th, they moved me to the rehabilitation facility on the Derby Road, and on the 9th, I was 3 days out from general anesthesia and on a schedule of pain medication that I remember mostly as a series of sealings. Darlene Frizzell was the intake coordinator. She was a heavy-set woman about 50 with reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she came around in the afternoons with a clipboard for insurance forms, and she was pleasant, and she had a stamp in her cardigan pocket because half the people who work in those places carry a notary commission so that the paperwork does not have to wait. Dale came on the 9th, in the afternoon. He came with a folder, and I want to note that it was a folder, and he sat on the edge of the bed, and he put the papers on the tray table, and he said the sentence. I have gone over more times in the last year than I have gone over any sentence in my life. It is just so I can talk to the insurance for you, Mom. I signed it. I signed a stack. There were 4 or 5 sheets, and I signed the bottom of each one where his finger was, and Darlene Frizzell came in and stamped them, and I do not remember reading a single word, and I could not have read a single word because I could not follow the plot of a television program that week. He drove the 11 miles from that facility to this town office and had it recorded at 3:51 that same afternoon, and I lay in a bed with a pillow between my knees and thought that my son had come to visit me. That was the 9th of January, 2023, almost 3 years ago. I stood at that counter and I did the arithmetic on what that document meant, and I did it fast, and I have never in my life had a piece of arithmetic hurt like that one. It meant that my signature had never mattered. Not at the wedding, not on the loan, not anywhere. I mean specifically here. It meant that on the 15th of November, my son had walked into my kitchen with a contract he did not need me to sign and put a yellow sticky note on the signature line and asked me to sign it anyway. He had held a general durable power of attorney over me for 2 years and 10 months. He could sign that timber contract with his own hand and my name, and it would be as good as mine. So the folder was not a request. The folder was a test. He wanted to find out whether I would still do what I was told. And I had. I had smiled at him and told him I would take care of it and promised him a surprise, and his shoulders had dropped 1.5 inches in relief, and I had read that relief as love. It was not love. It was a man getting the result of a test. Renee was standing very still on the other side of the counter with her hands folded. "Do you want a copy?" she said. "Yes. It is $1 a page. It is 3 pages. Make it 2 sets." She went to the machine. It takes about 40 seconds a page on that machine. It is the loudest thing in that building, and I stood there and listened to it go 6 times. While she was at it, I asked her for one more thing. "Renee, where would the current use application be?" The original one." She did not ask me why. She went back into the vault, and I could hear her moving a step stool, and she came out with a much older book, one of the ones with the corners worn white, and she set it down and turned the pages carefully, the way you handle those, and she found it. Book 86, page 212. Application for Use Value Appraisal filed, 1981 town of Colvin Hollow, 63 acres of managed forest land. There were 2 signatures at the bottom, Roy A. Prouty, Arletta M. Prouty. Mine was 23 years old there. It was a rounder hand than I have now with more air in it. His was the cramped, hard-right, leaning scrawl of a man who wrote almost entirely on clipboards in the cold. We had signed that on a Tuesday in the town office in 1981, standing at that same counter in front of a clerk named Adele Bazell, who has been dead since 2001. His father had just deeded us the place. We were 23 and 29, and we were putting the hill into a program that meant we would be taxed on what the land grew instead of what somebody might someday pay to build on it. And it meant we were promising the state that we would keep it as forest and manage it under a written plan for as long as we owned it. I have kept that promise for 44 years. I have updated the management plan with the county forester 3 times. I have filed the paperwork every single year alone since '93, and not one human being has ever thanked me for it or asked me about it or known that it existed. 2 signatures of mine in the same building. One made in 1981 at 23 years old with my husband standing next to me in daylight of my own free will about a promise I intended to keep. One made in 2023 at 64 years old, 3 days out of surgery on a tray table on a document I could not read because my son put his finger on the line. Renee put the copies in a manila envelope and slid it across. $3, she said, for the 6 pages. I gave her a 5 and she opened the drawer for change and I told her to keep it. And she looked at me and put the $2 in the envelope with the copies anyway, and neither one of us said anything about it. I walked out into the lot. It was 28 degrees and the sky had that white glare it gets before snow that has not made up its mind. I got into the truck and I put the envelope on the passenger seat and I put my hands on the wheel. I did not start the engine. I sat there for 40 minutes. There is a thing that happens to a woman when she finds out that the man she raised has been holding a document over her life for almost 3 years, and it is not what people think. It is not rage, not at first. Rage is a later thing, and it is a warmer thing, and it does not come until you have somewhere to put it. What comes first is a kind of terrible arithmetic. Your mind goes back through every conversation of the last 3 years and reprices it. The call in April of '23 asking how the season went, repriced. The visit in October of '24 when he walked the first bench with me and asked how the big maples were doing, repriced. Every time he asked how I was managing, every time he asked whether the hill was getting to be too much for me, every single one of those sentences had a second meaning that I had never heard, and I sat in that truck, and I heard all of them again in order in his voice, and this time I heard what they were. He had not been checking on me. He had been checking on the inventory. The heater in that truck does not work well, and my breath was fogging the windshield, and I did not turn the key. I thought about the boy in the passenger seat of the other truck, the good truck in the school lot in 1993, asking me if we were poor now. I had told him no. I had told him we had the hill. Somewhere in the last 32 years, my son had heard those words and kept them, and turned them over, and turned them again, until they stopped meaning we are safe, and started meaning there is an asset. And here is the part I could not get around sitting there with the frost coming up the inside of the glass. He had not stolen anything. He had not forged anything. He had not broken into my house. He had come to my bedside 3 days after they cut my hip open, and he had used the only thing his father and I ever really gave him, which was the certainty that his mother would sign anything he put in front of her. That is not a crime you can photograph. At some point I noticed my hands were still on the wheel at 10 and 2, and I took them off, and I opened the envelope and looked at page 87 one more time, and then I put it back. Then I said one sentence out loud in an empty truck in an empty parking lot on the 26th of November, and it was not "I will make him pay," and it was not "how could you," and it was not any of the things a person is supposed to say. I said all right, and then I started the engine and drove home and put the envelope in the drawer of the side table on top of the card with the 91 children's names on it, and I made myself a piece of toast because I had not eaten anything since the night before. And I sat down at the same kitchen table where the yellow folder had been, and I began very slowly to think. Thanksgiving was the next day. Sloan had said over the pie that they needed to know by Thanksgiving realistically because of scheduling. I had turned that sentence over for 6 days. Nobody called. I did not expect a dinner invitation. In the 10 years since Wyatt was born, I have been to their table for Thanksgiving twice, and both times it was because Gordon and his wife were in Florida, and there was a chair. But I did expect the phone to ring because Sloan had put a deadline on the table in my own house, and a woman who sets a deadline collects on it. The phone did not ring, and it took me most of the morning to understand why. They were not waiting on my answer. They had my answer. They had gotten it on the 15th of November when I smiled and said I would take care of it, and everything since then had been a formality that only I was participating in. I went to Ruth Ann's at 2. She had a chicken because a turkey is ridiculous for 2 women, and we ate at her kitchen table with the television going in the other room for company, and at some point she said, "You have not told me the rest of it." I told her the rest of it. Book 2, 14 page 87, January 9th of 2023, 3:51 in the afternoon. She got up and went to the counter and stood there with her back to me for a good while, running water into a pan she did not need to fill. "Roy would have taken that boy apart," she said. "Roy is not here." "No." She turned the water off. "So it is you." On Friday, I had an appointment at the eye clinic in Newport. They watch the cataract in my right eye and have been watching it for 3 years and will keep watching it until it is bad enough to bill for. The waiting room at that place is a long one with chairs down both walls. And at that hour, it is all of us, the 65 and up, with our folded appointment cards and our plastic bags of drops. There was a woman across from me who had to be 85. She had a cane hooked on the arm of her chair, and she had done her hair, which I noticed because at that age, doing your hair for an eye appointment is a decision. She caught me looking, and she took it as permission the way they do. "You are Roy Prouty's wife." I said I was. I knew his mother, Colvin Hollow. She nodded to herself a few times. "You still boil up there?" "Every March." "Good," she said. "Good, you keep boiling." She looked at the wall for a while. Then she said without any change in her voice, "My son sold 11 acres of mine to a solar company while I was in the hospital in Burlington with my gallbladder. 19 and 22. Frontage on the county road." I did not say anything. There is nothing to say to that, and she was not looking for anything. "He had the paperwork. It was all legal, they told me. Signed and legal." She adjusted the cane on the arm of the chair. "I waited. I sat in that house for 2 years, and I waited for him to come to me and say, 'Ma, I did a thing.' Because he would. That was my boy. He would get there." "Did he? He is 56 years old," she said. "He never got there. And now I am 84, and I am out of time." They called her name, and she got herself up out of the chair in 3 separate movements, and she stopped in front of me on her way past. "You are what, 65, 67, 67. Then you have got some," she said. "Do not spend it waiting." That night I sat down at my kitchen table and read the contract. Not skimmed. Read. All 14 pages out loud in my own kitchen with a pencil, the way I used to read a state nutrition guideline when the district changed a rule on me. It took 2 hours and 10 minutes. Page 4 was the diameter limit, which I already knew about. Page 6 was the access and the landing and the road, and it gave the buyer the right to construct a log landing not to exceed 1/2 acre at the town road end of the existing skid road, and the right to improve the skid road with gravel and culvert as necessary. Page 7 had the harvest window. October 1st through April 15th, frozen ground preferred. October 1st. Page 9 was the payment terms, and page 9 was where I stopped. I had assumed the way you assume the sun will come up, that a contract selling my timber would pay the money to me. It did not. Purchaser shall remit the total consideration of $152,000 to Prouty Hill Holdings, LLC, in 3 installments as follows. I read the name 4 times. Prouty Hill Holdings, LLC. I have lived on Prouty Hill Road since June of 1979. I know every entity that has ever had anything to do with that hill because I am the one who has filed the paperwork on all of them for 44 years. There has never been a company. There has never been a partnership. There is a deed in my name and a use value appraisal application in my name and a homeowner's policy in my name, and that is the whole of it. I had never heard those 4 words in my life. I called Warren Kittredge's office first thing Monday morning, and his secretary, who is his niece and who is 71 herself, put me in at 11. Warren Kittredge is 81 years old. His office is up a flight of stairs over the pharmacy, and there is no elevator, which is a thing that half his clients can no longer manage, and he knows it, and he has said for a decade that he will move the office, and he will not move the office. He did the deed when Roy's father conveyed us the place in 1981. He did Roy's estate in 94. He did my will in 2006. I put the copies from the town office on his desk and the contract, and I told him what I knew. He read page 87 twice, holding it up near the window, because that is where his light is. Then he set it down, and he took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, and he said the first honest thing anybody had said to me in 3 weeks. "Well, Arletta, this is a bad one. Then he told me 3 things, and I am going to set them down the way he told them, because they are the whole spine of what came after. The first thing was the good news. You can revoke this. Today, 14 VSA, Chapter 127. A principal may revoke a power of attorney at any time, so long as she has capacity, and you have got more capacity than I do. In writing signed. And then 2 more steps that people forget, and that are the only steps that matter. You give actual written notice to the agent. And you give actual written notice to every third party who has relied on it. And because this thing was recorded in the land records, you record the revocation in the same records in the same town, so that anybody who pulls that book from now on sees it sitting there. Recorded where anybody can read it. Yes. In this town. Yes, he said. I know. The second thing was the part I had gotten wrong on my own. I had spent the weekend building an argument in my head. He had used my property to enrich himself. Surely there was a rule against that. Surely a power of attorney does not let a man take his mother's land and sell it to himself. Kittredge took that away from me in about 90 seconds, and he was kind about it, and it did not matter that he was kind. The statutory form in Vermont has a warning in it. It says an agent who is not the principal's ancestor, spouse, or descendant may not use the property to benefit the agent. He looked at me. Read that again in your head. I read it again in my head. He is my descendant. He is your son. The prohibition in that sentence is written for a nephew, for a neighbor, for a girlfriend. It is not written for a son. He put his glasses back on. So we are not going to win by saying he had no right to benefit. We would lose that, and losing it early would cost us everything after. Then what? Loyalty, he said. An agent under that chapter owes the principal a duty of loyalty. He is required to act in your interest. He is required not to create a conflict of interest that impairs his ability to act impartially for you. Those are not decorations. Those are obligations, and an agent who breaks them is liable for the damages he causes. He turned the contract around and put his finger on page 9. And this, he said, is not an argument. This is a fact on a piece of paper. He signed an instrument that moves your asset and directs the entire proceeds to an entity that is not you. Now, do we know what that entity is? No. Then that is the first thing you do when you leave here, and it will take you 10 minutes and cost you nothing. The third thing was the clock. He got up and went to the shelf behind him and took down a volume, and he found what he wanted without hunting for it, which told me he had already looked it up before I arrived. 27 VSA Section 348. This is a curative statute. The legislature put it in because title examiners were choking on old powers of attorney with technical defects in the way they were executed. So the rule now is this. A power of attorney affecting an interest in real property once it is recorded is good, notwithstanding a failure in the formalities, unless within 3 years after recording, somebody commences an action challenging its validity and records a copy of the complaint in the land records of that town. 3 years. 3 years from recording. Yours was recorded on the 9th of January, 2023. I did the subtraction before he could say it. The 9th of January. Of 2026, he said. 39 days. And after that, that particular door closes. There is a second door, and it does not close. He tapped the book. The section says expressly that the cure does not apply to a power of attorney obtained by fraud or forgery. Nobody forged your name. You signed it. So the door that stays open is fraud. Fraud means we allege that your son obtained that signature by telling you the document was something other than what it was. He let that sit. Warren. I know. You are telling me that to use the second door I have to swear out a complaint. Signed by you under oath. Naming him? Naming him. Setting out what he told you and when and where. That he came to your bedside 3 days after a hip replacement and represented to you that a general durable power of attorney was an insurance form. He folded his hands. And there is one more piece, and I would be a poor lawyer if I let you find it out later. To preserve the challenge under this section, you also record a copy of that complaint in the land records. The town office, the counter, the green-spined books, Rennie. Everybody in Colvin Hollow reads those books, I said. Everybody in Colvin Hollow reads those books. I have lived in that town for 46 years. I fed their children. I know it. I sat there in that chair over the pharmacy with the radiator knocking, and I understood the shape of the thing for the first time. It was not a question of whether I could win. It was a question of what I would be willing to say out loud in public in writing forever about the boy I raised. "Do not decide today," Kittredge said. "But do not decide on the 8th of January either. That is the mistake people make. They think they are keeping the option open, and what they are actually doing is running out the clock and calling it patience. The library in Colvin Hollow is open Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday, and it has 2 public computers, and I do not own one, and I am not good on them. Sarah at the desk showed me. It took 9 minutes. The Vermont Secretary of State keeps a business search online, and it is free and anybody in the world can use it. You put in a name, and it tells you what exists. Prouty Hill Holdings, LLC, Domestic Limited Liability Company. Filing date the 12th of September, 2025. Principal office and address in Burlington that I recognized as his office building. Member, 1 member, Dale R. Prouty." Sarah asked if I wanted it printed, and I said yes, and it printed on 1 page, and it cost 15 cents, and I put a quarter in the cup, and did not wait for the change. September 12th. He had formed that company 9 days before he set foot in my house in September to walk the first bench with me and ask in a perfectly ordinary voice how the big maples were doing on the second bench, because he had not been up that far in a while. Kittredge called me at home on Tuesday afternoon. "I ran a judgment and lien search," he said. "It is a routine. I do it on everybody in a case before I file anything because you want to know what the other side is standing on before you push them. All right? Your son and his wife have a writ of attachment recorded against their property in Stowe. It went on the land records there in September." I sat down on the arm of the chair. "For how much?" $186,400. Plaintiff is an equipment finance company out of Connecticut. It arises from a commercial equipment note and a lease guarantee on a fitness studio in Stowe. Sloan Studio. Sloan Studio closed in August. It is in the pleadings. I had not known that. I want to note that. My daughter-in-law's business had been closed for 3 months and gone under, and nobody in that family had told me, and they had come to my table on the 22nd of November and talked about opportunity. "There is a second guarantor on the note," Kittredge said, and he said it slowly because he had already read ahead and he knew what he was handing me. "Who?" "Gordon P. Hallowell." I got the pencil. "I want to show you what I did next, because it is the single most important thing that happened in the whole month of December, and it happened at my kitchen table in about 4 minutes with a pencil in the back of a feed store calendar. The contract sells the standing timber for $152,000. The debt with the attachment on it is $186,400. 152 minus 186.4 is negative 34,400. Even if he cut every maple on that hill and got every dollar, and none of it was taxed, and nobody took a cent, he would still be 34,400 short. And they had asked me for 38,400 on top of it, for Christmas." I sat there with the pencil in my hand, and I laughed. Out loud alone in my kitchen, one hard, ugly bark of a laugh that surprised me so much I put my hand over my mouth like a girl in church. Because my son had never done the subtraction. He is a regional sales manager. He does arithmetic for a living. He can tell you what select and better hard maple is going for per 1,000 board feet in 3 states, and he had not sat down with a pencil and worked out that the plan he built to save his house would not save his house. He was not going to win. He was going to cut down 65 years of his family's work and lose the house anyway, and then have nothing at all, and he had never once run the numbers to the bottom of the page. That was the moment I stopped being able to tell the difference between what I felt about my son and what I felt about a boy. On Tuesday, the 2nd of December, I walked the hill. There were 6 inches down from the weekend, and it was 22 degrees and clear. I put on Roy's old wool pants, which I have had taken in twice, and the boots, and I took the cane I use on ice and the little pack with the tape and the knife in it out of habit because you do not go up that hill in December without the tape and the knife. The gate is a farm gate at the bottom where the skid road leaves the town road. There is a chain and a padlock on it, and there has been the same padlock since 2009. The padlock was new. It was a bright brass thing, unweathered, the kind they sell 4 to a card at the hardware store keyed alike. Mine was a scarred gray master lock with a dent in the shackle where a plow had caught it. I stood there in the road for about a minute. Then I went around the end of the gate the way I have gone around the end of the gate my whole life, through the gap by the big yellow birch, because the chain has never been the point of the chain. 40 feet up the skid road I found the first blue paint. It was on the uphill side of a maple about 16 inches through a slashed band at chest height, and a dot at the base, which is how you mark a tree for cutting so that after it is down, the crew can still find the mark on the stump and prove which tree they took. 60 feet up there was another, then 2 more, then it was everywhere. I stopped counting the honest way after a while because I could not keep the numbers straight. So I did it in hundreds, going stand by stand across the first bench, and I made it past 900 before I stopped, and I had not gone up to the second bench yet. Every one of them was a producing tree. Every one of them was over 14 inches. I could have told you the tap history of 200 of them without thinking. There was orange flagging tape strung along 3 lines running down the fall of the slope, which is how you lay out skid trails before you bring machines in. And at the bottom where the skid road comes out to the town road, there was half an acre pushed flat. Stumps ground out topsoil shoved into a berm on the north side. The whole pad crowned and graded a new culvert set in the ditch line and gravel over the top of it, and truck tracks in the gravel under the snow that were older than the snow. Somebody had built a log landing on my land. Not planned one, built one, with a machine and a culvert and a load of crushed stone that costs real money. Page 6 of the contract had given the buyer that right, and page 7 had opened the harvest window on the 1st of October, and I had signed nothing, and it was already done. I went back up, past the first bench up the pitch to the second, which is the part I have not climbed since before the hip. I want to be accurate about that. I did not stop going up there out of grief or out of neglect. I stopped in the summer of 2022 because the pitch between the benches is about 300 feet of climb over broken ground, and after the surgery I did not trust the hip on it, and the tubing on the second bench is on the same gravity run as the first, so I could keep the system alive from below. 3.5 years. That is how long that ground had gone unwalked by the only person who has ever loved it. I came up over the lip of the second bench, and I saw the stone wall making its turn to the east, and I saw the light coming through where light does not come through. There were 20 stumps. Cut low, cut clean, the tops chipped, and this slash windrowed off to the side by a machine. 20 of the largest maples on that hill, taken out of the middle of the finest stand my husband's family ever grew, in a neat block up against the wall where nobody standing at the bottom of the hill could see the hole they left. I put my hand on the nearest one, and the sawdust in the notch was gray on top and yellow underneath. That is October sawdust. In this county, cut sawdust goes gray in about 3 weeks, and then it just sits there under the snow all winter and does not change. I went from stump to stump. I do not know why. I counted them, and then I counted them again coming back, which is how I know there were exactly 20 and not 19 or 21. The 17th one was against the turn of the wall, 38 inches through. There is not another stump that size anywhere on that hill, and there will not be another one in my lifetime, or my grandchildren's. I got down on my knees in the snow, which took a while, and which I did badly. The blaze was still there. Not all of it. The saw had gone through at about 14 inches off the ground, and the blaze had been cut down at knee height, which meant the cut had taken the top half of it. The rectangle Roy carved with his knife in the spring of 1987 had been split in 2, and the upper part of it, the part with the D, had gone down the hill on a truck in October and was in somebody's flooring plant by now, or in somebody's kitchen. What was left on that stump was the bottom half, the bottom curve of the 8 and the bottom curve of the 6. 8-6, the year my son was born. I put my thumb in it the way I have put my thumb in it every March for 38 years on my way past. I would like to be able to tell you what I said or thought, and I cannot, because I do not think I did either one. I knelt in the snow at that stump with my thumb in the crossbar of a number my husband cut with his pocket knife when he was 35 years old and full of a feeling he did not have the words for, and time went by, and at some point I understood that my knees were wet through, and that it was going to be dark in an hour, and I got myself up. I called Hollis Barrow from the house that night at 6:15, and he came the next morning. Hollis is the county forester for Orleans County. He is 54. He has had my file since 2009, and it was Hollis and I who sat at this kitchen table in the winter of 2019 and wrote the current management plan that runs through 2029, and his signature is on it under mine. He came up in a state truck with a diameter tape and a camera and a handheld GPS, and he did not say very much for the first hour. He measured every stump. He photographed every stump with the tape in the frame, and then a wide shot of the block, and then the landing, and then a long series along the flagged trails. He took a point on each of the 20 and wrote them in a field book in pencil because pens do not work in the cold. At the 17th, he crouched a long time. "That is a blaze," he said. My husband cut it. 1987. He photographed it from 4 angles without being asked. When he was done, we stood at the landing and he told me 2 things. First, no notice came to me. There is nothing in my file. Nobody in this county called me. Nobody submitted anything. Nobody asked me a question. If you are enrolled and you are going to harvest, that comes across my desk. This did not come across my desk. And second, he took his hat off and put it back on, which is what he does. Arletta, the plan you and I wrote in 2019 prescribes single tree selection and crop tree release. That is what is on file with the state. What is marked out there is a diameter limit cut at 14 inches, which is the exact opposite of that plan. It is what we call high grading. It takes the best and leaves the rest, and it is the one thing the program exists to prevent. What happens if it goes? If a harvest is conducted contrary to the management plan, the department treats that portion as developed. That triggers the land use change tax, which is 10% of the fair market value of the affected land as of when it left use value. He looked out over the landing. And the whole parcel comes out of the program, not the cut part, the whole 63 acres, for a minimum of 5 years. I asked him to put numbers on it because I have learned to ask for numbers. The fair market value on 63 acres of that quality, he said, is somewhere around $220,000. 10% is $22,000 payable to the state. And the tax. Under current use, I pay about $1,180 a year on the enrolled land. Out of the program at full appraisal, it goes to something near $4,900. That is $3,700 a year in new tax for 5 years, which is another $18,600. $40,600. That is what the cut would have cost me on top of the trees. My son had built a plan that would take my sugar bush, fail to save his house, and hand me a $40,000 bill. Hollis put his field book in his jacket. I have got your file back to 81, he said. You have never missed a year, not one. Do you know how rare that is? No. It is rare, he said. I want to be plain about what saved me because it is not what anybody would guess. It was not a lawyer. It was not the state. It was not that I was clever. It was that for 44 years I filled out a form nobody read. Every year alone since '94 at this table, with the same pen cup, I did the paperwork on a program that gave me a tax break in exchange for a promise about how the land would be treated, and I renewed the management plan with the county forester on schedule 3 separate times, and I filed the activity reports, and not one living human being ever asked me about it, or thanked me for it, or knew that it existed. That is the work women my age do. It is not the work anybody sees. It is the 6th of 11 things you do on a Tuesday, and it never once looks like anything. And it turned out that the only wall standing between my husband's family's hill and a chainsaw was a stack of forms in a filing cabinet in St. Johnsbury with my handwriting on them. I did 3 things on Thursday the 4th of December, and I told nobody but Ruth Ann. At 11 in the morning, I signed a revocation of power of attorney in Warren Kittredge's office. 1 page. It stated that I, Arletta M. Prouty, revoked in its entirety the durable power of attorney, recorded in Book 214 at page 87, effective immediately, and that my former agent had no authority to act for me in any matter. At 2:14 in the afternoon, Rini Tatro recorded it in the Colvin Hollow Land Records, and she indexed it against the original, so that from that hour forward, anybody who pulled Book 214 and turned to page 87 would find a marginal reference sending them to the revocation. At 3:40 in the afternoon, I stood at the counter of the post office and mailed 4 certified letters, return receipt requested each one containing a certified copy of the recorded revocation. 1 to Dale R. Prouty at his home in Stowe, 1 to Buddy LaChance at LaChance Logging, 1 to the Equipment Finance Company's Council in Connecticut, 1 to the Vermont Department of Taxes Division of Property Valuation and Review. Kittredge had explained the second one to me twice because he wanted to be sure I understood exactly what I was doing. Under the timber trespass statute in this state, a person who cuts another person's trees without permission is liable for 3 times the value of the timber and any damage to the land. There is one exception, and it is a real one. If the defendant proves he had good reason to believe he had the legal right to cut the damages, come down to single. Buddy LaChance had a signed contract and a certified copy of a recorded power of attorney. As of the 3rd of December, Buddy LaChance had good reason to believe he would walk. As of the moment he signed the green card on that envelope, he would not. You are not sending him a threat, Kittredge said. You are sending him knowledge. After he has it, every stick that comes off that hill is worth 3 times what it was worth the day before, and he knows it, and his insurer knows it, and his lawyer will tell him so inside of an hour. There was a fourth thing on Kittredge's desk that afternoon, and I did not do it. He had drafted the complaint. Superior Court, Orleans Unit, Civil Division. Arletta M. Prouty, plaintiff against Dale R. Prouty, defendant. Count 1, fraud in the procurement of a power of attorney. It was 4 pages. Paragraph, the insurance for you, Mom. There was a verification page at the back with a line for my signature under the words, "The foregoing is true to the best of my knowledge and belief." I picked up the pen. I had the pen in my hand and my hand on the paper, and I read paragraph 9 one more time, and what stopped me was not love, and it was not weakness, and it was not even the town. It was the words on the line. Dale R. Prouty, defendant. Once that is filed, it is filed. Once it is recorded in Book 215 or whatever book they are up to. It is in that vault next to my wedding, next to Roy's estate, next to the deed his father gave us, next to my own signature at 23 years old for as long as that building stands. In 100 years, somebody researching this hill will pull the chain of title and find it and read what a mother swore about her son. I put the pen down. I need until after Christmas, I said. Warren Kittredge did not argue with me and did not sigh and did not look disappointed, and I have thought since that he had probably watched 100 people do exactly what I did in that chair. He put the draft in a folder and wrote a date on the tab and slid it into the cabinet behind him. "You have got until the 9th of January, he said. "I will call you on the 2nd and again on the 7th, not to nag you, so that whichever way you go on purpose." On Friday, the 5th of December, I drove up to the gate at 10 in the morning because I could not stay in the house. There were 3 trucks parked on the town road at the bottom, and a low-bed trailer, and up on the landing there was a skidder that had not been there on Tuesday. 5 men on the pad with their hoods down and coffee, and a 6th walking the flag line with a clipboard. And my son in a hard hat that was not his because it had a company sticker on it that was not his company, and it sat too high on his head the way a borrowed hard hat does. I went around the end of the gate and walked up onto my own landing. They saw me one at a time the way men do, and the talking stopped in pieces. I stopped about 15 feet from the skidder, and I said it as plainly as I know how. "This is my land. I want all of you off it today." Buddy LaChance came over. I have known Buddy since he was in the 4th grade, and I served him hot lunch. He is 58 now, and he has run a crew for 30 years, and he has a reputation in this county for being fair, which is worth something, and which is why I want to be accurate about how he behaved. He was not cruel. He was uncomfortable, and he was polite, and he had a job to protect. "Mrs. Prouty, Arletta." He took his glove off to talk to me, which men of his kind do. "I have got a signed contract." "You have got a contract I never signed." "No, ma'am, you did not sign it, and I said that to my attorney back in October, and he told me what to do about it." He went to the truck and came back with a manila folder and opened it in front of me on the hood in the cold page by page, like a man showing a receipt. "That is the executed agreement, and that is a certified copy of a durable power of attorney recorded in your town clerk's office book, 214 page 87, appointing your son as your agent. My attorney pulled it himself. That is why I asked for your signature on top of it. When the fellow holding the power is family, my attorney makes me get the owner's signature 2 belt and suspenders, so nobody comes back at me in 3 years. There it was, the one piece I had not had. The sticky note had not been my son's idea. It had been a logger's lawyer covering a logger. My son had needed a signature he did not need from a mother he did not have to ask, and had walked into my kitchen and asked anyway, because it cost him nothing to find out whether I would still do what I was told. "Buddy, that document is not what he told me it was." "That may well be, and I am sorry for it, and I mean that." He closed the folder. "But I have got $31,000 of my own money in that road, and that culvert, and that pad, and a deposit on a processor that is sitting in Sheffield waiting on me. I cannot walk off a job on a recorded instrument, because there is trouble in a family. If there is a problem with the power, that is a problem between you and him." And then my son spoke, and he had not moved from where he was standing the whole time, and he did not look at me. "Mom, you are embarrassing me." 5 men on that pad looked at the ground. "Come on," Dale said. "Go home. We will talk about it after the holidays." I looked at him for a while. I want to say for the record that I did not have a single thing to say that would have changed anything, and that I knew it, and that I did not try. Everything I had was in the mail. 2 envelopes were somewhere between the post office in Colvin Hollow and the 2 men standing in front of me in a sorting facility in White River Junction or on a truck on the interstate, and neither of them knew, and it was going to take one more day, and if I opened my mouth about it now, I would give away the only thing I had. So I stood on my own land, standing in front of my son and a crew of men who used to eat my food, and I said nothing at all, and I turned around and I walked down. It is 1,400 meters from the landing to the gate, and then another 400 to where I had left the truck on the shoulder, and there was snow, and my hip was bad from Tuesday, and I did it in 26 minutes. They did not watch me go. I could hear them behind me. Somebody started a machine when I was about a third of the way down. I got in the truck and I got the door shut, and I put both hands on the wheel, and I broke apart. That is the only time in this whole account that I lost it, and it happened in a truck on the shoulder of a town road at 10:45 in the morning with the engine off. And it lasted about 4 minutes, and nobody saw it, and I want it written down because I am not going to pretend I did this like a stone. The green card came back in my mailbox on Tuesday the 9th. Buddy LaChance had signed for his on Saturday the 6th at 10:20 in the morning, and his signature was that same L with the loop on it. Dale had signed for his on Saturday the 6th too at 11:51, and his signature on that card was the fast, unreadable scrawl of a man signing for something in a doorway with a delivery driver waiting. I put both cards in the drawer of the side table on top of the copies and the school card with the 91 names. That same afternoon, Warren Kittredge filed the other complaint. Not the fraud one. That one stayed in the cabinet with the date on the tab. The other one. Superior Court Orleans Unit Civil Division. Arletta M. Prouty, plaintiff against Dale R. Prouty and Prouty Hill Holdings, LLC defendants. Timber trespass under 13 VSA. Section 3606 for the 20 trees cut in October, treble damages demanded, plus damage to the land and improvements, plus an emergency motion to enjoin any further cutting pending hearing. Attached as exhibits were Hollis Barrow's 20 photographs, his field notes, his 20 GPS points, and his signed statement that no notice of harvest had been submitted to the county forester and that the marked prescription was contrary to the approved management plan on file. The court set the hearing for the 6th of January, 3 days before the other door closed. Dale called me on Thursday the 18th of December at 7 in the evening. His voice was fine. That is what I remember. There was music behind him, and one of the children was yelling about something in another room, and he sounded like a man calling his mother in December. Hey, Mom, just confirming for Christmas Eve. We are doing it at Gordon and Bitsy's this year, the big one, everybody. Sloane's brother is coming down, 7 o'clock. Do not bring anything, they are having it catered. All right. And hey, a little laugh. Do not forget the surprise. You promised us a surprise. I have not forgotten, I said. He hung up without saying goodbye the way he does, and I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand. He had signed the green card on the 6th of December at 11:51 in the morning. He had held a certified envelope from the Colvin Hollow post office with a certified copy of a recorded revocation in it, and 12 days had gone by, and he had called me on the 18th to remind me about my surprise. There is only one way a man makes that call. He never opened it. Buddy LaChance's truck came into my dooryard on Saturday the 20th of December at 9 in the morning. I heard it before I saw it because that truck has a bad exhaust and everybody in 3 towns knows the sound of it. I stood at the kitchen window with a dish towel in my hand and watched him sit in it for a while with the engine off, which is what a man does when he has rehearsed something in the cab and has arrived and does not like the rehearsal anymore. Then he got out and came up the steps carrying a cardboard file box against his hip, and he knocked instead of calling in through the door the way people do around here. And that told me the shape of the visit before he opened his mouth. I let him in and he stood on the mat and would not take his boots off and would not sit down. He set the box on my kitchen table, which is where the yellow folder had been on the 15th of November, and where the calendar with the pencil arithmetic was still lying, and he put both hands on the back of a chair. I opened your letter, he said. The certified one. I signed for it on the 6th, and I did not open it until Thursday, and I want you to know that is on me and not on the mail. I said, all right. He said, then I called my attorney Thursday night at his house, which I have done twice in 30 years, and he came into his office on a Friday in December to see me, which he has never done. I put the kettle on because I did not know what else to do with my hands, and because I have never in my life had a person stand in my kitchen and not offer them something. He did not want coffee. He said, Mrs. Prouty, I am not here to apologize. I want to be straight about that with you because you will find out anyway, and I would rather you hear the true version. I am here because my attorney told me that a recorded revocation with my signature on the green card means that if one more stick comes off that hill, I am looking at 3 times the value of the timber and 3 times the damage to the land, and my insurance will not cover a knowing trespass, and the state will pull my license, and I have got 2 men with families on that crew. He looked at the floor for a second. I am here to save myself. That is the whole of it. All right, I said, and I meant it. I want that understood because a lot of what happens in a thing like this depends on being able to tell the difference between a man who has wronged you and a man who has been used, and I had spent 2 weeks deciding which one Buddy LaChance was. He was 58 years old, and he had a payroll, and he had $31,000 in a road, and he had done what the papers in front of him said he could do. He had also served under me in a manner of speaking from the 4th grade through the 6th, and I could still remember that he would not eat cooked carrots, and that he would eat anything else on earth. He opened the box. That is my whole file on this job, he said. Every page. I am giving it to you because my attorney told me that cooperating with the landowner is the single best thing I can do for myself, and because he told me that if I hand it over voluntarily, it looks a good deal better than if it comes out of me with a subpoena in January. So there it is. I would rather you had it than a judge decided I hid it. There were 4 inches of paper in that box. The executed contract. The certified copy of the power of attorney from Book 214. A cruise report from a consulting forester out of Barton, dated the 29th of September, estimating 511,000 board feet of sugar maple on 63 acres with a stumpage value of $152,000, which is where the number came from. Receipts for the culvert and the gravel and the excavator time on the landing. A processor deposit slip from a dealer in Sheffield. Text messages printed out on plain paper, 61 pages of them, because his attorney had told him to print everything. And 1 page that did not belong with any of it. It was a letter agreement 1 page on plain white paper with no letterhead dated the 19th of October, 2025. It was between Gordon P. Hallowell individually and LaChance Logging LLC. It recited that Mr. Hallowell had introduced the purchaser to the timber opportunity on Prouty Hill Road in Colvin Hollow and had facilitated the negotiation of the harvest agreement. It provided that upon closing, Mr. Hallowell would be paid a finder's fee equal to 15% of the gross consideration off the top before any disbursement to the seller. It was signed by Buddy LaChance, and it was signed by Gordon P. Hallowell in a fat black fountain pen hand with a flourish under the last L. 15% of $152,000 is $22,800. I sat down. Buddy LaChance stayed standing at the back of the chair. I did not want to sign that, he said. It is not how anybody around here does business. But he brought me the job, and he was very clear that there was no job without him, and I had a crew coming off a lot in Craftsbury with nothing lined up behind it, and it was October. He rubbed the side of his face. I have thought about that piece of paper every week since I signed it. I read it 4 times. I read it the way I had read page 9, which is to say I read it the first 2 times for the words, and the second 2 times for what the words meant about people. Gordon Hallowell had not been dragged into this by a son-in-law in trouble. Gordon Hallowell had found the timber, brought the buyer, negotiated the deal, and written himself a fee off the top of a sale of his own daughter's mother-in-law's land, and he had put it in writing 5 days before the contract was executed. $22,800 off the top before any disbursement to the seller. And there was no seller. The seller line paid to Prouty Hill Holdings LLC sole member, Dale R. Prouty. So the money went out of my hill, $22,800, to Gordon $129,200 to my son's company, and not $1 of it was ever going to pass through my hands or my bank or my name. Buddy, I said, who cut the 20 trees. He had known that question was coming, and I could see that he had decided in the truck to answer it. My crew did. 3 days, the 28th through the 30th of October. It was a trial block. Hallowell wanted to know what the grade was going to run before he committed to the schedule, and he wanted to know it in October, not in February. He took a breath. And he wanted to know something else. Say it. He wanted to know whether you would notice. The kettle was going, and I got up and turned it off and stood at the stove with my back to him. How did you know when to go in? Your son gave me the days, Buddy said. He texted me on the 22nd. It is in there, page 40 of the printouts. He said the 28th through the 30th was clear she is away at a church thing in Barre back Friday night. I had been at a retreat at the Diocesan Center and Bar from Tuesday the 28th until Friday the 31st. It is a thing I have done every October since 2009. It is 3 days and 2 nights, and there is a Wednesday supper, and there are about 40 women there, and I have known most of them for 15 years. My son knows about it because for 16 years I have told him about it the way you tell your grown child the small facts of your calendar, not because it matters, but because it is a way of talking to somebody. Buddy LaChance left about 10 minutes later. On the mat with his hand on the door, he said one more thing. For what it is worth, your husband skidded for my father one winter when I was a boy. I did not put that together until my attorney read me the name on the deed. Then he said, I am sorry, Mrs. Prouty, which he had told me at the beginning he was not going to say, and he went out and got in the truck and sat in it a while again before he started it. I did not touch the box for the rest of that day. I put it on the floor of the front room, and I went out and did the wood stove and shoveled the step and made myself a poached egg at 4 in the afternoon because I had not eaten anything. And that night, I sat down with the box and a legal pad, and I went through all 4 inches of it page by page until 20 minutes past 2 in the morning. I have been asked since whether that was the night I decided what to do on Christmas Eve. It was not. I had known what I was going to do since the 5th of December, standing on my own landing while my son told me I was embarrassing him. What I did that night was decide what I was going to say, and the answer I arrived at somewhere around 1 in the morning with 61 pages of my son's text messages spread across the table was that I was going to say almost nothing at all, because I had watched it happen. On the 15th of November, I had a folder put in front of me by a man who was not asking. On the 5th of December, I had a contract and a certified copy held up in front of me on the hood of a truck in the cold. Both times the paper did the work, and the person holding it did not have to raise his voice. I had spent my life explaining myself to people who were not listening, and I was not going to spend Christmas Eve doing it in a room where every single person had already decided what kind of woman I was. The crate was in the sugar house under the syrup bench where it has been since I do not know when. It is a pine box 17 inches by 11 by 10, made for 12 one-gallon tins with rope cleats cut into the ends. Roy's father built 4 of them in the 50s, and Roy stenciled them in 1979. The summer before we were married with a stencil, he cut himself out of a sheet of tin. Prouty Sugar Works, Colvin Hollow, Fee. The paint is a dull barn red, and it has gone thin on the high spots. I carried it down to the house on Monday and cleaned 60 years of sugar house off it with a rag and warm water, and then I gave it a coat of boiled linseed oil with my fingers, which is how Roy did every wooden thing he ever owned, and I set it in front of the wood stove on newspaper to take up the oil. It took 2 days. The letters came up dark and even. It smelled like the inside of the sugar house in August, which is a smell I could not describe to you if I had a year. On Tuesday, I called Rini Tatro and asked if I could borrow something to wear. I have exactly 1 nice dress, and I have had it since 2006, and I have worn it to 9 funerals. I did not want a dress. I said, Rini, do you still have that green sweater? And she said the wool one. And I said yes, and she brought it across the same afternoon along with a pie I had not asked for. It is a heavy dark green wool cardigan with horn buttons that her mother knit in the 1970s, and that I have admired for 20 years. It fit me the way a thing knit for somebody else fits, which is not perfectly. I wore that and my good wool trousers and my church shoes and my mother's watch, and I did not put on anything else. Sloane's mother would be in something from a store in Burlington, and her sister-in-law would be in something from a store in Boston, and I understood perfectly well that I could not compete in that room, and I had understood it for 12 years. What I decided on the 23rd of December, standing in front of the mirror in my bedroom, was that I was not going to try. I was not going to that house to fit in. I was going to that house to give my son and his family a Christmas present, and a woman does not need a good dress to hand somebody a box. Ruth Ann drove. My hip does not want 22 miles of frost heaves in the dark, and I was not going to arrive at that house shaking. She picked me up at 6:15 in her Subaru with the crate on the back seat wedged in with a folded blanket so it would not slide, and she did not talk for the first 10 miles, which is the greatest kindness that woman has ever done me, and she has done me a great many. Somewhere past Coventry, she said, "You have got the order straight." I have got the order straight. Say it. Dale, Sloane, Gordon, then the children. And what do you say? As little as I can get away with. She nodded at the windshield. If it gets away from you, she said, you come out that door and you get in this car and you do not stop to be polite to a single soul. I will be at the end of the driveway with it running. Gordon and Bitsy Hallowell live on the western shore of Lake Memphremagog, north of Newport, in a house that was built in 1998, and that has a boathouse. There were 9 cars in the turnaround, and every window on the lakeside was lit, and there were candles in all of them, the electric kind on timers. You could hear the party from the driveway. Bitsy opened the door, and she did what she has done every single time I have entered a room she was in, which is to take both my hands and hold them out and look me over, and then say something with the word lovely in it. Arletta, how lovely. And you came all this way. She took my coat, and she did not take the crate because I did not offer it, and she looked at it once and decided not to ask. There were 14 of us, Gordon and Bitsy, their son Trip, who is 41, and his wife Dana, and their 2 Colby, who is 14, and Josie, who is 11, Bitsy's sister Nancy Chamberlain, and her husband Whit down from Stansted, Gordon's brother Rand, Sloan and Dale, Wyatt and Piper, and me. Trip Hallowell shook my hand. He is the only person in that family who has ever shaken my hand, and he does it every time, and he does it like he means it, and he said, "Mrs. Prouty, good to see you," and got me a glass of water without being asked, because he has noticed at some point in the last decade that I do not drink. I have thought since that if Trip Hallowell had not been in that room the whole night would have gone differently, and I did not know it then. Dale came out of the kitchen with a beer and hugged me one-armed. "Hey, Mom, thanks for coming. This means a lot." He looked at the crate. "What is that?" "That is the surprise." He laughed. He actually laughed, and his face was open and easy, and he said, "You are killing me." All right, we will do it after presents." Then he said in exactly the same voice, "I have been buried at work. I have not opened a piece of mail in 2 weeks. There is a stack on the table you would not believe." I said, "I imagine there is." Dinner was catered out of Newport, and it was very good, and there was a great deal of it. I sat at the far end next to Piper, who is 6, and across from Whit Chamberlain, who talked to Rand Hallowell about a boat for 1 hour and 11 minutes. Piper showed me a loose tooth 4 separate times, and I was appropriately impressed 4 separate times. I ate about a third of what was on my plate. Twice during dinner, Gordon Hallowell looked down the table at me. Not for long. Once over the prime rib, and once when Bitsy was talking about the church pageant. He is a big man with white hair and a good tailor, and he has a way of looking at a person for exactly as long as it takes to price them. I had been priced by Gordon Hallowell at my son's wedding in 2015, and the number had not changed since. Sloan stood up before dessert with a glass and a spoon. She said what people say. "It has been a big year. Daddy and Mom, thank you for having us. We are so lucky. Family is everything." And then she said, "And this year we have had some really unbelievable support from family, and I just want to say publicly how much that means to us." And she looked down the table at me, and half the table followed her eyes, and Bitsy said, "Oh, Arletta," in a delighted voice, and Nancy Chamberlain turned all the way around in her chair to see. I looked at my plate. Not out of shame. I looked at my plate because if I had looked up, I would have said something in that moment, and saying something in that moment would have wasted it. We went into the front room after for presents. That is a room with an 18-foot ceiling and a stone chimney and a tree that a company comes and does. There was a pile of presents that came up past the second branch. Wyatt got a tablet and a remote control thing that went in a circle on the floor. Piper got a doll with a wardrobe and a trunk. Sloan got a handbag out of a box with tissue in it and made a noise. Dale got a watch from Gordon, and I watched my son take a watch out of a box from a man who was down to take $22,800 off the top of his mother's trees and put it on his wrist and hold it up for the room. Nobody gave me anything, and I did not expect anybody to, and it does not signify. In 12 years, I have received 4 Christmas presents from that side of the family, and 3 of them were candles. When the floor was covered in paper, Sloan clapped twice and said, Okay, everybody. Arletta has something for us." The room turned. 14 people and a fire going and a great deal of wine, and every face in that room already knew what was coming, because they had been told, and what they had been told was that the little woman from the hill had come through with something remarkable. I got up, my hip caught, and I let it. I picked up the crate from beside my chair, and I carried it to the coffee table in front of the fireplace and set it down, and the weight of it hitting that glass made a sound that stopped the room the rest of the way. I said, "I promised my son a surprise. This is the surprise." That is the entire speech I gave on Christmas Eve. 11 words, and then 9 more. I had a great deal I could have said, and I did not say any of it, and I have never once regretted that. I opened the lid. Then I took the things out of it one at a time, and I put each one into the hands of the person it belonged to, and I did not put anything on a table, and I did not hand anything to anybody to pass along, because a thing you have to reach out and take is not the same as a thing that arrives in front of you. The first one went to my son. It was 4 documents held with a black clip, and I put it in his hands, and he had to shift his beer to his left to take it. The top page was a certified copy of a revocation of power of attorney recorded in the land records of the town of Colvin Hollow on the 4th of December, 2025, at 2:14 in the afternoon, indexed against Book 214, page 87. Stapled behind it was a green domestic return receipt card with his own signature on it, dated the 6th of December, 11:51 in the morning. Behind that was a file-stamped copy of a complaint filed in the Superior Court of Vermont Orleans Unit Civil Division on the 9th of December. Arletta M. Prouty, plaintiff against Dale R. Prouty and Prouty Hill Holdings, LLC defendants. Timber trespass. Treble damages demanded. 20 photographs attached as exhibits, each one stamped and initialed by the county forester for Orleans County, and the 17th photograph is a close view of a 38-inch stump with a bark blaze on it cut in half by a saw, and what is legible in the photograph is the bottom of an 8 and the bottom of a 6. And the last page was one sheet printed off a public website for 15 cents. Vermont Secretary of State Business Services Division, Prouty Hill Holdings, LLC, filed the 12th of September, 2025. Member Dale R. Prouty. He read the first page and he did not understand it. I watched him not understand it. He got about halfway down, and his eyes went back to the top and started again, and I have seen that exact thing happen on the face of a 9-year-old boy handed a report card he was not expecting. The second one went to Sloan. She had her hand out before I got to her, and she was still smiling because she had not looked at her husband. It was one document, 6 pages. A writ of attachment recorded in the land records of the town of Stowe in the amount of $186,400 against the property at their address in favor of an equipment finance company arising out of a commercial equipment note and a lease guarantee on a fitness studio. I did not say a word to her. I want that on the record too. I did not say one word to my daughter-in-law on Christmas Eve. I put 6 pages in her hands in front of her mother and her father and her brother and her aunt and her uncle. And I stepped back, and that was all. She read the caption. Her face did a thing I am not going to be able to describe properly. It did not go white, and it did not go red. It went still all at once, the way water goes still, and then she looked up, and she did not look at me. She looked at her father. The third one went to Gordon Hallowell. He was standing by the chimney with a glass in his hand, and he had been watching the whole thing with an expression of mild social patience, the way a man watches a child's recital he has been made to attend, and when I came toward him, he actually smiled and put his hand out for it. 1 page, no letterhead, dated the 19th of October, between Gordon P. Hallowell individually and LaChance Logging LLC. Finder's fee equal to 15% of the gross consideration off the top before any disbursement to the seller. His own signature at the bottom in fat black ink with the flourish under the last L. And then I went back to the crate, and I took out the last 2 things, and they were 2-quart jars with the rings on tight, and I gave one to Wyatt and one to Piper, and I crouched down to do it, which cost me something. The labels are the ones I write by hand every year with a marker at the kitchen table. Prouty Sugar Works 2025 season, 191 gallons. Piper held hers with both hands and turned it toward the fire to see the color, which is the correct thing to do with syrup, and which nobody taught her. Wyatt said, "Is this the stuff from your hill?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Cool." And it was the first entirely honest sentence that anybody in that room had said to me in 12 years. Bitsy Hallowell was standing 4 feet from her husband the whole time, and I did not give Bitsy Hallowell anything. That was deliberate, and it was the one piece of it that I had gone back and forth on for 4 days. I had wondered whether to hand her a copy of the letter because she was going to find out anyway, and it seemed cleaner. I decided not to. She had never done anything to me except be useless, and there is a difference between a person who wrongs you and a person who simply never once stood up, and I did not think the second one had earned a document with her name attached to it in front of her whole family. So she got nothing, and she stood there and watched her husband read a piece of paper, and she did the thing that anybody would do, which is she moved in behind his shoulder to see it, because when a room goes quiet, the last person to know is the one who cannot see. The room was quiet by then, completely. The tree lights were doing the slow fade thing they do, and the fire was going, and somebody's phone buzzed twice on a table and nobody picked it up. Sloane said, "Where is the money?" Not to me, to the room. Her voice was flat and a little high. "Dale, where is the money?" Dale had gotten to page 3. He had gotten to the photographs. He was standing in the middle of his in-laws' front room holding 20 photographs of stumps on a hill in Colvin Hollow, and he had not made a sound. Bitsy Hallowell said, "Gordon, what is $22,800? I want to be exact about the next 90 seconds, because they are the 90 seconds the whole autumn was built toward, and because it did not go the way I would have written it." Gordon folded the page in half. He did it calmly. He said, "It is nothing. It is a business matter." And Bitsy said, "It says Prouty Hill Road." And he said Bitsy in a voice I had never heard him use in front of people. And she stopped. And Trip Hallowell walked over and took the paper out of his father's hand. He did not snatch it. That is what made it unbearable to watch. He put 2 fingers on the corner of it and drew it out of his father's fingers, the way you take a knife away from a toddler, and his father let him, because a man cannot hold on to a piece of paper in front of 11 people without becoming the kind of man who holds on to a piece of paper in front of 11 people. Trip unfolded it. He read the whole thing. It is 1 page, and it took him about 40 seconds, and nobody in that room said anything for 40 seconds. Then he said, "Dad, did you take a commission on her land?" Gordon said, "It is more complicated than that." "It is 1 page, Trip said. "It is not complicated. It says 15% off the top before any disbursement to the seller." He looked up. "Who is the seller?" Nobody answered him. So he answered himself because he had the answer in his hand, and because he is not a stupid man, and he looked over at me standing by the coffee table in Rini Tatro's mother's green sweater, and he said, "It is her. She is the seller, and she is standing right there." Sloane started crying then, and it was not grief, and I am not going to pretend I did not know the difference. She said, "Why are you doing this to us?" She said it to me loudly across the room in front of her children. "Why would you do this on Christmas? What is wrong with you?" And Wyatt, who is 9 years old, and who had been sitting on the floor by the tree the whole time with a jar of syrup in his lap, got up and picked one of the photographs off the carpet where it had come loose out of the clip when his father's hands opened. He looked at it for a while. Then he held it up, and he said, "Grammy, did somebody cut down our trees, our trees?" Nobody answered that child. Not his mother, not his father, not his grandfather. There were 11 adults in that room, and not one of them had a sentence for a 9-year-old boy holding a photograph of a stump, and the silence went on long enough that he turned the picture around and looked at it again himself. I went over and I crouched down again, which cost me more the second time, and I said, "Yes, honey, 20 of them, in October." And he said, "Who did?" And I said, "That is what the judge is going to decide next month." And he said, "Was it the big one by the wall?" Because he has been up that hill with me 4 times in his life. And it turns out that 4 times is enough for a boy to remember which one is the big one. I said, "Yes." He said, "Oh." And he sat back down on the floor with the picture. And that was the worst moment of my entire life, and it did not have anything to do with money. Gordon Hallowell said, "Get out of my house." He said it from the chimney. He had gotten his color back, and he had gotten his size back, and he pointed at the door with 2 fingers holding a glass, and he said, "You come into my home on Christmas Eve, and you do this in front of my grandchildren. Get out." I have thought a great deal about what I said next, because it is the only thing I said that night that was not necessary. Everything else I did was a delivery. That one was mine. I said, "Mr. Hallowell, I cooked lunch at Colvin Hollow Elementary for 38 years. I fed about 6,000 children in this county. I fed your daughter-in-law's cousins, and I fed 2 of the men on the crew that cut those trees." I picked up the crate off the table and put it under my arm. In 38 years, I never once took 15% off the top of anybody. Then I walked out. Nobody stopped me. Bitsy Hallowell said my name once in the hall. Just my name, nothing after it, and I did not turn around. Trip Hallowell got the door and got my coat and did not say anything at all, which was correct. Dale did not move. The last I saw of my son on the 24th of December, he was standing in the middle of a room full of wrapping paper with a stack of documents in one hand and a watch on his wrist, looking at a photograph of a stump, and he had not said one word since I put it in his hands. Not one. Not to me and not to his wife and not to his son. Ruth Ann was at the end of the driveway with the engine running and the wipers going. I got in and put the crate in the back and got the door shut, and she pulled out onto the lake road, and neither of us said anything for 4 miles. Then I said, "Did I go too far?" Ruth Ann Pike drove another quarter-mile before she answered me, which is how she does everything. "No," she said. "You went exactly far enough. And I will tell you how I know. You did not raise your voice. You did not say one thing about that girl's marriage. And you did not give that woman a piece of paper with her name on it in front of her own sister." She put the wipers up a notch. "A person who has gone too far always takes the extra shot. You left it on the table. I did not cry in the car. I want to be accurate about that. What I felt on the road between Newport and Colvin Hollow on Christmas Eve was not grief, and it was not triumph, and the closest word I have got for it is the feeling at the end of a season when the last barrel is filled and the fire is out, and the building is still warm, and you are too tired to be pleased about it yet. Empty and level, something finished. Ruth Ann came in and got the wood stove going because it had gone down to coals, and she would not let me do it. She stood in my kitchen with her coat still on and said, "Do you want me to stay?" And I said no, and she said, "I am 400 feet away, and I do not sleep," and went home. It was 20 minutes to midnight. I made chamomile because I was not going to sleep on tea with anything in it. I put the crate on the floor by the wood stove where it had sat while the oil took up. On the kitchen wall there is a feed store calendar with a picture of a barn on it, and December has 25 squares of nothing, and 1 square with my son's telephone number written in it from the 18th. I stood in front of it with the cup in both hands, and on the table where it had been since the 4th of December was a manila envelope from Warren Kittredge with a date written on the tab, and inside it 4 pages. Superior Court Orleans Unit, Arletta M. Prouty, plaintiff, against Dale R. Prouty, defendant, count 1 fraud in the procurement of a power of attorney, and a verification page at the back with a blank line on it. The hearing was on the 6th of January. The other door closed on the 9th. 16 days. Nobody called on Christmas Day. Nobody called on the 26th or the 27th either. I had expected that, and I had told myself I expected it, and it turns out those are 2 different things, and the second one does not do you any good at 7 in the evening when the house is quiet. So I worked. That is what my mother did, and what her mother did, and it is the only medicine I have ever found that does not wear off. I went up to the sugar house on the 26th with a broom and a putty knife, and I did the whole building. I swept the arch out and hauled 2 5-gallon pails of ash down the hill on the sled. I pulled the filter press apart and cleaned it. I went over every one of the 410 feet of main line I can reach from the flat, and found 9 places where the squirrels had been at the drop lines, and I taped 7 of them and cut and spliced 2. I counted spiles. I had 1,600 sound ones, and I needed 2,400 and 800 spiles is about $400. And I wrote that number on the back of the feed store calendar under the other numbers. On the 27th, I made a list of what the season needed if I was going to run the whole bush for the first time since 2017. 800 spiles, 2 rolls of 5/16 line, gaskets for the press, 4 cord of dry hardwood because I had 3.5 and I would burn 6, and a reline on the evaporator, which is a new set of flues and a new front pan, and which is $9,400. And which I had known about since March, and had been carrying around the way you carry a diagnosis. Warren Kittredge called me on Monday the 29th of December at 8:10 in the morning, which is early for him, and he did not say hello either. He said, "Arletta, can you come in this morning? I have got something, and I do not want to describe it to you over a telephone." I got there at 10. He was standing behind his desk instead of sitting at it, which I had never seen, and there was a file on the blotter that was not the color of his current files. His current files are manila. This one was the old kind, the heavy buff-colored ones with the metal fasteners, and it had gone brown at the edges the way paper does in a room with a radiator, and it had a typed label on the tab. Prouty R. 11, 1993. I was pulling everything on the hill for January, he said. Deed chained the estate file the boundary business with the Bouchards in 88. And this came out of the back of the drawer with the estate file, and I did not remember it, and I want to tell you that plainly. I am 81 years old, and I did not remember it, and I have had it in that cabinet for 32 years. He turned it around and opened it. There was a memorandum on top in his own hand on a yellow pad sheet, dated the 4th of November, 1993. Client Roy A. Prouty. Present client. Reconveyance of Sugarbush Trust. I read it standing up. It is 9 lines. Client came in without appointment. Client reports chest pain event 3 weeks prior. Physician consulted, no follow-up scheduled. Client wishes to place the 63-acre sugar bush beyond reach of sale. Client concerned that if he predeceases the land will be sold under pressure. Client wishes wife to have full use and control for life. Client wishes land to pass to issue, but not to be alienable by them. Draft trust and deed. Client to return with wife. Appointment set 12/29/93, 10:00 a.m. Under it was the draft. 13 pages. A deed conveying the 63 acres from Roy A. Prouty and Arletta M. Prouty to a trust reserving to Arletta M. Prouty a life estate with full rights of use occupancy and the making of maple syrup, and a trust instrument with the beneficiaries named on page 4. The beneficiaries were in the typing of a secretary who is dead, now my children born and to be born. There were signature lines. There was a place for a witness and a place for a notary. There was nothing on any of them. I sat down in the chair, and I put both hands flat on my knees, and I looked at that page for a long time, and Warren Kittredge stood behind his desk and did not say one word for what I would guess was 4 minutes. The chest pain event 3 weeks prior. That would have been the middle of October 1993. I did not know about it. I have gone back over that autumn 100 times since, and I cannot find it. He would have been out on a road somewhere by himself, or in the sugar house, or in the truck, and he had it, and he did not tell his wife. And 3 weeks later, he drove himself to a lawyer's office over a pharmacy and sat in this chair and said out loud that he was afraid the hill would get sold. He was 41 years old. He had a wife who was 35 and a boy who was 7, and he had a chest pain he did not mention, and what he did about it was to try to nail the land down. The appointment was the 29th of December, 1993 at 10 in the morning. He was going to bring me. He never told me that either. He died on the 18th, 11 days before. He would have had it signed, Kittredge said finally. There was nothing complicated in it. Half an hour and we would have been done. I said, why did nobody find this? Because it was a draft in a file that never became a matter, he said. There was no engagement letter, no bill, no docket. He paid me nothing. I remember him now sitting where you are, and I remember thinking he was too young to be doing it, and I remember being glad he was doing it anyway. And then he died, and I did the estate, and this stayed in the drawer behind the estate file for 32 years. And I am sorry, Arletta. I am very sorry. I do not blame that man. I want that written down because he blamed himself, and he has gone on blaming himself. A draft nobody signs is a piece of paper. It became something else on the 29th of December 2025, and it only became something else because a logger from Craftsbury brought me a cardboard box. We talked for 2 hours and 10 minutes. I want to set down the substance of it because there was a decision in there, and I made it in that room, and I have not changed it since. Roy's draft named his children born and to be born. In 1993, that meant 1 7-year-old boy and whatever else we might have had, and we did not have any others. So Roy's document signed as written would have put the 63 acres into a trust for Dale with me holding it for life, and Dale unable to sell it. Kittredge laid it out for me straight. If you execute this as your husband drafted it, you will have done exactly what he wanted. And what he wanted as of the 4th of November 1993 was to protect the hill from your son's future circumstances which he could not see and to give it to your son whom he loved. Those two things were compatible in 93. You have to decide whether they are compatible now. I said if I sign it as written, can Dale ever sell it? No, not one tree. The trust would forbid alienation and forbid a commercial clear-cut and require it be maintained as a sugar bush. Then Roy already solved it, I said. 32 years ago, sitting in this chair with a pain in his chest. He solved that half of it, Kittredge said. He did not solve the other half. He could not have known about the other half. Which is what? Which is that a trustee has to be somebody, and a beneficiary who is also the only person in the world who wants the land turned into money is a beneficiary who will spend 40 years litigating with his trustee. It will be his life's work. He will file petitions to terminate. He will find a lawyer in Burlington who will tell him that no trust is truly perpetual and take a retainer to prove it. He took his glasses off. Your husband drafted a wall. He did not draft a wall with a man on the other side of it pushing. So I changed it. Here is what I signed on the 29th of December, 2025, at 11:40 in the morning, at the same desk in the same room over the pharmacy, 32 years to the day after my husband's appointment. A deed conveying the 63 acres of sugarbush from Arletta M. Prouty to the Roy Prouty Sugarbush Trust. The house and the 2 acres it sits on stay mine outright, in my own name forever, which Kittredge insisted on, and which I would have insisted on if he had not. I reserved to myself a life estate in the sugar bush with full rights of use and occupancy and the making of maple syrup, which is Roy's language out of the 1993 draft word for word, and I would not let him modernize it. The beneficiaries are Wyatt R. Prouty and Piper A. Prouty in equal shares with the trust to be held until the younger of them attains the age of 25, which will be in the year 2044. At which time I will be 86 if I am anything. The trustee is Ruth Ann E. Pike. Successor trustee, Maureen T. Tatro. Second successor, the Vermont Land Trust or such conservation organization as the sitting trustee shall designate. The trust requires that the land be maintained as a working sugar bush, that it remain enrolled in the use value appraisal program with a management plan approved by the county forester, and that no timber sale be conducted other than in accordance with that plan. It forbids a diameter limit harvest in those words because Hollis Barrow read the draft and told Kittredge to name the thing. And then there is paragraph 11, and paragraph 11 is mine, and Warren Kittredge argued with me about it for 35 minutes. Paragraph 11 provides that Dale R. Prouty is appointed the operator of the sugar bush for the term of his natural life. He shall have the right to enter, to tap, to gather, to boil, to maintain the improvements, and to sell the crop. He shall receive no compensation in the first season. In each season thereafter he shall receive a share of the net proceeds set by the trustee. He may not be removed except for waste or for a felony against the trust property. He is not a beneficiary. He may not encumber, mortgage, convey, or sell any interest in the land or in one tree standing on it, and any instrument purporting to do so is void. Kittredge said, "Arletta, you are handing the keys of that building to the man who tried to sell it." I said, "I am handing him the work, not the keys." "He will not take it." "Then he will not take it," I said, "and the trustee will hire somebody, and I will have offered it, and that will be the end of my part." He sat down at that. Then he said, "I have to tell you 2 things, and then I will draw it as you want it." The first was the Medicaid look back. If I need long-term care within 5 years of the transfer, the state will look at this conveyance, and it may cost me. I am 67 and my hip is titanium, and my mother lived to 91 in her own kitchen, and I told him to write it down that I had been advised and that I understood it, and he did. The second thing he said was, "The current use enrollment does not follow automatically. The trust has to file. Hollis Barrow will have to sign a continuation, and the plan has to be recertified in the trust's name inside of the filing window, or you will trip the very tax we are trying to avoid." I said then he had better call Hollis Barrow, and he picked up the telephone and called him while I sat there, and Hollis Barrow came in on the 31st of December, which was a Wednesday and a holiday, and signed it. I signed the deed and the trust at 11:40 in the morning on the 29th. Renee Tatro recorded them at 2:20 in the afternoon in the Colvin Hollow Land Records book, 216 pages 141 through 155. Ruth Ann Pike signed her acceptance of trust at Kittredge's desk at noon with her reading glasses pushed up in her hair, and the only thing she said about it was, "I want it on the record that I am 72 and that I intend to outlive this problem." Warren Kittredge mailed a certified copy of the executed trust to Dale R. Prouty at his address in Stowe on the 30th of December because a person named in an instrument gets notice of the instrument. That is the whole reason it went. It was not a message. I did not write anything on it, and there was nothing in the envelope but the document. He called me on the 2nd of January the way he said he would, about the other thing, and I told him I had not decided, and he said all right and hung up. He called again on the 7th, and I told him the same thing, and he said all right and hung up again, and that man never once pushed me, and I have thought since that not pushing me was the most skillful thing he did in the whole business. The hearing was on Tuesday the 6th of January, 2026, at 9 in the morning in the Superior Court in Newport Civil Division Courtroom 2. It was on the motion for a preliminary injunction, whether anybody could put a saw on that hill before the case was tried. Ruth Ann drove me, and Renee Tatro took the day off and came, and the 3 of us sat in the second row on the left, and I wore the green sweater again because I am not going to pretend it was an accident. Buddy LaChance went first because he was our witness, which had surprised his own attorney and which had been Kittredge's idea. He testified for about 40 minutes. He said he was given an executed contract and a certified copy of a durable power of attorney recorded in the land records of the town of Colvin Hollow, Book 214, page 87. He said his attorney pulled the record himself and advised him it appeared valid on its face. He said that on that basis he entered the property in October and cut 20 trees. Kittredge asked him whether he knew at the time of the October cutting that Mrs. Prouty had not authorized it. He said no. And that answer, which is the truth, is the answer that protected Buddy LaChance, because the statute in this state says that if the defendant proves he had good reason to believe he had the legal right to cut the damages come down from treble to single. Kittredge asked him that question himself on direct for our side, and I understood exactly why, and I had told him to do it. Then he asked when Mr. LaChance learned otherwise, and Buddy said the 4th of December when it was mailed, and the 18th of December when he opened it, and he said, "And I stood the crew down that night, and I have not put a saw on that hill since, and I am not going to." The judge asked him one question from the bench. She asked whether he had been paid anything. He said no, not $1, and that he was out $31,000 on the road, and the culvert and the pad and a deposit on a processor. Dale was under subpoena. He came in a suit, and he sat on the other side with the lawyer that Gordon Hallowell had paid for, which I only learned later. And when they called him, he went up and was sworn and sat down and did not look at me. I am going to set down what happened next as flatly as I can. The lawyer that Gordon Hallowell paid for had told my son and told him more than once that the clean way through this was to say he had done it alone, that he had the idea that he found the logger himself, that nobody advised him, and nobody introduced him, and nobody had a fee. It is a survivable story. It costs one man everything, and it saves everybody else, and it had been explained to him as the honorable thing, the thing that protects the family, and I know that because Trip Hallowell told me in February, and Trip Hallowell was in the room when it was explained. Kittredge asked him how he came to the timber. There was a pause on that stand that went on long enough that the clerk looked up, and my son said, "My father-in-law brought it to me." Then he answered every question that came after that in the same voice, and it went on for an hour and 10 minutes, and it was the worst hour of his life, and I sat in the second row and watched it. He testified that Gordon Hallowell had proposed the harvest in September, after the equipment note came due, and the attachment went on their house. That Gordon Hallowell introduced him to LaChance Logging. That Gordon Hallowell negotiated the price. That he formed Prouty Hill Holdings on the 12th of September, on his father-in-law's advice, and that the payment was directed to that company rather than to me because, and this is his own testimony, so that it would not have to go through my mother's account first. He testified that Gordon Hallowell requested the trial block in October to get a grade estimate before committing to a schedule. He was asked whether there was another reason for the October block. He said yes. He was asked what it was. He said, to see whether she would notice. He testified that he sent the 3-day window by text message on the 22nd of October, and that he knew his mother was at a retreat in Bari those days because she had told him about it in a telephone conversation earlier that month. And Kittredge asked him about the 9th of January 2023, and my son looked at the rail in front of him and said that he had brought his mother a durable power of attorney at a rehabilitation facility 3 days after a hip replacement, and that he had told her it was a form so that he could speak to her insurance company. He was asked whether that statement was true when he made it. He said no. He did not cry on the stand. He got through it. He came off the stand and walked past the second row on the left and did not look over and went out into the hall. The judge granted the injunction from the bench. She found that Mrs. Prouty was likely to succeed on the merits that the harm to a sugar bush of this age and quality was not compensable in money, and she enjoined any cutting, skidding, or removal of timber on the 63 acres pending final judgment. She ordered the landing stabilized against erosion before spring runoff at the defendant's expense. Kittredge moved that afternoon to add Gordon P. Hallowell as a defendant and attached the letter agreement of the 19th of October as an exhibit to the amended complaint. Trip Hallowell called my house on the 8th of January. I had not given that man my telephone number in 11 years, and I never did figure out where he got it. He asked whether I needed anything, and he meant it as a question and not as a formula, and I said no, and he said, "My mother is at our house. She has been since the 26th. I do not know how long." I said I was sorry to hear it. He said, "You do not have to say that to me." Then he said, "I read the file, all of it. My sister is not going to speak to you again, and I want you to know I understand why you did it, and that I do not hold 1 minute of it against you." And then he said goodbye, and that was the entire conversation, and it lasted under 2 minutes, and I sat down on the arm of the chair after it. The 9th of January was a Friday. Warren Kittredge did not call me that day. He had called on the 2nd and on the 7th, and he had said he would not call again, and he did not, and that was a kindness that took discipline. The envelope was on the kitchen table where it had been since the 4th of December. 4 pages. Arletta M. Prouty, plaintiff against Dale R. Prouty, defendant. Count 1, fraud in the procurement of a power of attorney. Paragraph 9. The 9th of January, 2023. The rehabilitation facility on the Derby Road, the tray table, the folder, and the sentence. The verification page at the back with the blank line. I want to be honest about what filing it would and would not have done, because I had asked Kittredge that exact question on the 7th, and he had given me a straight answer. It would not have saved the Hill. The Hill was already saved. The power was revoked on the 4th of December, the injunction came down on the 6th of January, and the contract was dead. It would not have proved anything new, because on the 6th of January my son sat in a courtroom under oath and said it himself, and that is in a transcript now, and it will be in a transcript in 50 years. What it would have done is add a count for fraud against him personally, with a claim for punitive damages, and put a complaint accusing my son of defrauding me into Book 216 or 217 of the Colvin Hollow Land records, next to the deed his grandfather gave us, and next to 2 signatures from 1981. I sat at that table from about 2 in the afternoon, and I did not do anything at all. I did not weigh it. I had weighed it for 5 weeks. I sat there the way you sit with a person at the end. At 4:30 in the afternoon, the light went off the kitchen wall the way it does in January, and it was done. There is no ceremony. A limitation does not ring a bell. It simply becomes the case that a thing which was possible at 4:29 is not possible at 4:31, and the only person in the world who knew that it had happened was sitting alone at a kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold in her hands. I put the envelope in the wood stove. It went up fast because it was dry. That is the last thing I ever gave my son, and he does not know about it, and he never will, and I am telling it here only because a person ought to be able to say once somewhere what it cost her to do the thing nobody saw. The case went to mediation on the 11th of February in a conference room in St. Johnsbury, and it settled at 10 minutes past 6 that evening for $34,000 joint, and several against Dale R. Prouty and Gordon P. Hallowell, with LaChance logging released. The number was built like this, and I want it broken out because people hear $34,000 and think a woman got a settlement. $6,200 was the stumpage value of the 20 trees established by Hollis Barrow's measurements and the consulting forester's own crews. Trebled under the statute, that is $18,600. The remaining $15,400 is damage to the land and the improvements. The half-acre landing, which has to be ripped, limed, seeded, and put back to woods. 1,100 feet of 5/16 line and main line that was cut through by the skidder on the second bench. Culvert removal. Erosion control on 400 yards of skid road that will be moving soil into Barrow Brook for the next 3 springs if it is not fixed. It is not a windfall. It is the price of putting back what was broken, plus a penalty for breaking it. And there is not $1 in that number for 20 trees that were 140 years old and are not coming back in my lifetime, or my grandchildren's or theirs. Gordon Hallowell's 15% letter came out at the mediation, and it is a public exhibit now. The bank that held the studio note had already called him on his guarantee in January. He sold 40% of the marina to a group out of Burlington in March to cover it, and he no longer controls the service department or the slips. And a man who has been the second richest man in Newport for 20 years is now a man with a minority position in a business with his name on the sign. Bitsy Hallowell stayed at Tripp and Dana's until the middle of April and then went home. I do not know anything more about that, and I do not want to. Sloan filed a personal bankruptcy petition on the 27th of February. She has told everyone who will listen that her mother-in-law destroyed her family at Christmas out of spite, and she has said it enough times that a certain number of people in Newport believe it, and I have decided that I am going to live with that. She has not spoken to me since the 24th of December, and she is not going to, and there is no version of this in which she and I sit down at a table. I am not going to write a scene here where she comes to the door and cries. She did not. She will not. Some people do not, and a person telling the truth about her own family has to be willing to leave that on the page. Dale and Sloan separated on the 6th of February. He rented a room and bar from a woman who takes in boarders near the granite sheds, and he still has his job. And I understand from Tripp Hallowell that he sends what he can, and that it is not enough, and that everybody involved knows it is not enough. He did not call me. Not in January, not in February. The settlement advance came through on the 27th of February. I ordered the reline that afternoon. New flues, new front pan, $9,400, and the fellow from the dealer in Hardwick came the second week of March with a helper and did it in a day and a half. and I paid it in full, and did not owe anybody anything, which had not been true of me since 1979. I bought 800 spiles. I bought 2 rolls of line in the gaskets and 4 cord of dry hardwood, and Ruth Ann's nephew and 2 boys off the Hollow Road stacked it for me in a day for $100 and a hot lunch, which is the only trade I have ever been good at. And I set 2,400 taps. It took me 11 days working alone, and part of 2 of those days I could not close my right hand at the end of it. And I got the second bench done on the 8th of March, and it was the first time the whole bush had been online since 2017. The ASAP came on the 10th. It went down to 22 degrees overnight, and it was going to 41 by 2 in the afternoon, which is the thing you wait for all winter, and by 9 at night the head tank was making the sound it makes, and I fired the arch at 4 in the morning on the 11th of March. At 10 past 4 there was a set of headlights coming up the town road. I heard it before I saw it because of where the sugar house sits, and I thought it was Ruth Ann, and it was not Ruth Ann. It was a car I did not know, a small gray thing with rust on the rocker panel, and it came up the road and stopped at the gate and sat there with the lights on for a while, and then the lights went off and a door opened. He came up the skid road on foot in the dark with no flashlight, which means he was walking it from memory, and he came into the light spilling out of the sugar house door and stopped about 8 feet short of it. He was in work clothes, canvas pants and an old barn coat and boots that were his own. No hard hat with anybody's sticker on it. He had not shaved in a while, and he had lost weight in his face, and he looked 45 instead of 39. He said, "I heard you were short a fireman." I stood in the doorway of that building with the arch roaring behind me and the steam coming up through the cupola into the dark, and I looked at my son for what I would guess was 12 seconds, and I have gone back over those 12 seconds more times than I have gone back over anything in this whole account. There are things I could have said. I could have said, "Where were you in January?" I could have said, "You gave a man the days I was away." I could have said, "Your father sat in a lawyer's office with a pain in his chest and tried to protect this hill from a thing he could not see coming, and the thing was you." Every one of those sentences was true, and every one of them was available, and I had them all. And I have thought since that the reason I did not say any of them is not that I am a good woman. It is that it was 10 past 4 in the morning on the 11th of March, and the pan was up, and a man who is standing in front of an arch feeding it does not have time to explain himself, and neither does the woman next to him, and there was 600 gallons in the head tank, and it was going to be gone by noon. So I stepped back out to the doorway, and I picked the hook up off the nail, and opened the fire door, and the light came out of it across the floor, and across both of us. And I said 4 minutes. I knew what it meant. He has known what it meant since he was 11 years old. He went to the wood rack, and he took a split, and he put it in, and he closed the door with the hook, and then he stood there, and he watched the second hand on the clock over the draw-off, which is what you do, which is what his father did, which is what I have done alone for 32 years. We boiled until 9:40 in the morning, and we made 22 gallons on the first day, and we did not talk about anything at all except sap and wood and where the foam was. At about 7, when the light came up over the ridge, I said, "Go up to the second bench." He said, "Ma." I said, "Go up and look at it. You're going to have to do it sometime, and you might as well do it while I am busy." I was gone 40 minutes. When he came back, he stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand, and he could not get anything out, and I did not help him. And after a while, he put his hat back on and went to the wood rack and picked up a split. That is the only conversation we have ever had about the 17th stump, and I expect it is the only one we ever will. He had the trust document in the car. He told me that in April. Warren Kittredge mailed it to him on the 30th of December, and it sat on the table in Stowe with the certified letter and the Christmas cards until he moved out on the 6th of February, and he read it in a rented room in Bari with his clothes still in bags, and it took him 5 weeks to get in the car. He read paragraph 11 times, he said. Operator for the term of his natural life. No compensation in the first season. May not encumber, mortgage, convey, or sell any interest in the land or in one tree standing on it, and any instrument purporting to do so is void. He said, "You made me the hired man." I said, "I made you the sugar maker. There is not any money in it, and there never was." That is the part nobody in that house ever understood. We finished on the 11th of April. 512 gallons, which is the best season off that hill since 2017, and about a third of it was fancy grade, which is what the whole bush coming back online will do for you. The reline paid for itself in 1 year, which the fellow from Hardwick said it would, and which I did not believe. Wyatt and Piper came for 2 weekends in April. Sloane does not permit it, and Dale does it anyway on his days. and I am not going to pretend that is a clean arrangement or that it will hold, and I have decided to take the weekends that come and not audit them. They labeled jars at the kitchen table with a marker, which is a job I have done alone every year since 1994, and Piper's labels are crooked, and Wyatt's are not, and I did not fix a single one of them. The label says Prouty Sugar Works, and under it the season and the gallons, and this year, for the first time, there is a third line, because Ruth Ann said as trustee she would like the name on it, and she is the trustee. The Roy Prouty Sugarbush Trust. Wyatt read it out loud and asked me what it meant. I said it was his grandfather's name. He said, the one who died. I said, yes, the one who died, and he thought about that for a second, and then he asked whether the trees belong to him now, and I said they belong to you and your sister, when your sister is 25, and he said, that is a long time. And I said it is, and he went back to labeling. I am 67 years old. I own a house and 2 acres in Colvin Hollow, Vermont, free and clear, and a 1998 Ford truck that will not last, and a life estate in 63 acres that I gave away in order to keep. I get $1,615 a month. I spend $1,293. The $322 that is left over is what I have to work with, and it has been what I have to work with for 5 years. I did not get rich out of this. Nobody sued their way to a fortune. $34,000 went into a pan and a set of flues, and 1,100 feet of tubing, and a half-acre of ripped ground that will be little maples in 20 years, and a stand of timber in 140, and I will never see it. And neither will my son, and neither will Wyatt, and we are going to do it anyway, because that is the arrangement my husband's family made with that hill before anybody alive was born. And here is the thing I keep coming back to, standing at that sink or walking that skid road, and it is not the thing anybody would guess. The only reason any of this worked is that for 44 years I filled out a form nobody read. I did not outsmart my son. I did not out-lawyer Gordon Hallowell. What happened is that in 1981, a 23-year-old woman stood at a counter in a town office next to her husband and signed a promise about how a piece of land would be treated, and then for 44 years alone, for 32 of them at a kitchen table with the same pen cup she did the paperwork. Every year. The management plan with the county forester 3 times on schedule. The activity reports. The renewal. 6 of 11 things on a Tuesday. And never once did a living soul ask about it or thank her for it or know that it existed. That is the work that women my age do, and it does not look like anything. It is invisible while you are doing it, and it is invisible after, and the whole time you are doing it, you are being told quietly in 100 small ways that the important things are happening somewhere else and are being done by somebody else. And then one December a man came onto that hill with a can of blue paint and a machine, and the only thing standing between 65 years of my husband's family and a truck full of saw logs was a stack of forms in a filing cabinet in St. Johnsbury with my handwriting on them. I did not own those trees. That is what I understand now at 67, standing in a doorway with steam going up into the dark. Nobody owns a tree that was here before your grandfather and will be here after your grandson. You are the person who is holding it for a while, and the only thing that is actually yours is what you did with the years you held it. 44 years of paperwork nobody read. It turned out to be the only thing I had that nobody could take,